Good evening, Mayor Stone and council members. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. With me here this evening at the table are Airport Manager Andy Swanson and Airport Operations Manager Michael Lukens. We also have CNS engineers staff available remotely. Next slide, please. So I'll just do a quick intro to kick us off here. Wanted to remind council, it's been about 1.5 years since we came to you for a March 2023 study session that was an overall update on airport status and also was an introduction to the long-range planning process that was beginning at that time. And you'll hear tonight about the work that has been done since then. Per one of the bullets on this slide, you'll also hear repeatedly that we are following an FAA process for this type of plan. That FAA process identifies issues and basically requires us to determine to what extent those issues can be addressed. What the FAA process does not do is impose a requirement on the city to approve any particular modification at the airport. So our primary goal with the council tonight is to get your feedback on these alternatives that have been developed to date so that we can take that forward and develop what will become a preferred alternative. We don't have one yet. The preferred alternative ultimately could be one of those that have already been developed or something completely different that incorporates whatever components the council most supports. And I will really want to frame the different components in 3 different buckets that I hope you'll keep in mind as we go through the slides, and they're shown here on this introductory slide. So first are the potential improvements that could prepare the airport for a more sustainable future that could include electric aircraft, renewable energy, microgrids, those kinds of things as we move beyond the current aviation framework. Then beyond that, there are things that are primarily runway improvements that respond to FAA safety criteria. And even within that, I would divide them into 2 categories. One is standards that involve things like the runway width, the runway protection area, certain separations from the runway. These are things that are included in all of the alternatives except for the no project alternative. But there are also things that could be addressed primarily within the airport's current footprint if there was no expansion of a runway. Then aside from those runway options, there are the different runway lengths that would require expanding beyond the current footprint into the baylands. And it's these potential runway expansion alternatives that have generated significant opposition as we've been going through the community engagement process with this work. So just noting council's input on these areas will be very helpful for us to take away as we go and work towards a preferred alternative. And then in addition to that, we'll also be providing an update on the status of unleaded fuel and the draft transition plan that we've developed and are beginning to implement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Good evening, council members. So as Brad mentioned, since March 2023, when we last had a council study session, our project team's been actively engaging with the community on this project. We hosted, I'm sorry, can we go to the next slide? We hosted a sustainability charrette where stakeholders brainstormed sustainability goals and strategies. Ideas included noise management, promoting alternative fuels like electric and hydrogen, and expanding partnerships with public transportation. We also hosted 5 public meetings, including sessions in East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And one of the first steps in the long-range plan was to conduct an inventory of the current airport facilities. We also examined other city plans, such as the Baylands Master Plan, the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, and the Comprehensive Plan for the city. After that, the next step was to develop the forecast of future operations based on forecast of future operations and based aircraft at the airport. The step also included determining the critical aircraft, which is defined by the FAA as the most demanding aircraft currently using the airport with at least 500 operations per year. With the forecast and critical aircraft, we developed potential improvements based on FAA criteria. And lastly, we have taken those potential improvements and developed 5 alternatives for the airport. Next slide, please. So going back to the forecast was developed with FAA criteria, which included local and national trends in general aviation. You can see in the graph that the forecast predicts an increase in operations year over year to about 220,000 operations annually by 2042. That's represented by the green line. The orange line represents the historical high in operations, which was about 233,000 in 1992. The critical aircraft was identified as the Pilatus PC-12. It's an efficient single-engine turboprop aircraft capable of carrying 7 to 9 passengers. And to note, this aircraft has been operating at the airport since before the city took over operation in 2014. Next slide, please. With the critical aircraft and forecast, we identified potential improvements that can be made at the airport. You can see on this table, those improvements include widening the runway, widening and lengthening the runway safety area and the runway object-free area. It also identified that the runway and taxiway separation could be improved. Those 4 improvements can potentially be made, as Brad mentioned, within the current airport boundaries. The RPZ is the next one on the list, and that currently meets the standards, but that location may change depending on the alternative chosen. The runway length is the last one, was another improvement identified, which included increasing the runway by 1,057 feet. Several of the alternatives show that, but they do include leaving the airport boundary with the longer runway. Next slide. Other potential improvements that were identified would be relocating the terminal building to the west side. That would be in line with the comp plan for the city. Providing for future electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, also known as eVTOL. Identifying locations for future solar and microgrid infrastructure. Increasing hangar spaces was identified as there was a demand for that. And lastly, the levee alignment was added to 4 of the alternatives. Although that was not a specific part of the plan, it was incorporated because it was a part of another project with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Next slide. So we developed the alternatives based on that FAA criteria I just went through. We're required to show how the airport could potentially meet those improvements. So there are 2 alternatives presented that meet all potential improvements described. However, there are constraints on how the airport can meet those improvements, including the space on the airport as well as impacts on wetlands outside of the airport. We also reviewed the layouts for efficiency and impact to surrounding communities, such as the Baylands and neighboring communities for noise. While the alternatives were developed on those potential improvements, again, they are not requirements. As Brad mentioned, staff does not have a preferred alternative at this time, and the preferred alternative can be one of the ones presented tonight, a combination of those alternatives, or a newly prepared one based on feedback received. So next slide. So going into the alternatives, this alternative 1 is no action. Would assume that no improvements are made at the airport other than required for maintenance and operations. It doesn't meet any of the FAA criteria for safety or align with any of the other city's plans. It wouldn't provide for dedicated facilities for electric aircraft or solar. Next slide. Alternative 2 shifts the runway to the northeast to meet the first 4 FAA improvements described in terms of runway width, separation, safety area, and object-free area. That doesn't achieve the runway length, but instead proposes a 2,600-foot runway. It would require some fill of the wetlands for grading on the south end. The runway would be raised in this alternative and integrated into the levee system for sea level rise. It also includes a parallel taxiway for improved efficiency at the field. And finally, in the red circle, you can see the location identified for a future vertiport. Next slide. Alternative 3 shifts the runway southeast onto the existing golf course, achieving the full 3,500 foot improvement. This option was intended to minimize impact on wetlands, but it does not address sea level rise. However, it also results in splitting the apron into 2 sections, which would increase in efficiency and taxi time for aircraft. In the red circle, you can see the location proposed for the vertiport. Next slide. Alternative 4 shifts the runway to the northeast, extends it to 3,500 feet and meets all of the FAA improvements. This would have the biggest impact on the wetlands to the south of the existing runway. Like alternative 2, this would raise the runway and integrate it into the levee system. The vertiport is located closer to the southwest corner to provide additional separation between eVTOL operations and fixed wing operations using the runway. Next slide. This last alternative presents somewhat of a middle ground between alternative 2 and alternative 4. Instead of the full 3,500 foot length, it proposes a 3,000 foot runway with a shift to the northeast. Like alternatives 2 and 4, this would also raise the runway to integrate it into the levee system and provide space for eVTOL operations in the same location as alternative 4. So those are the 5 alternatives. Next slide. We had significant outreach for this project, and there has been extensive interest from organizations, including the City of East Palo Alto, City of Menlo Park, Mid-Peninsula Open Space, Save Our Bay, California Pilots Association, and Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, just to name a few. A survey was conducted over the summer for approximately 8 weeks. We received 1,523 responses. The community was asked to rank alternatives. You can see in the table that alternative 1 was the most preferred option with 43%, while alternative 4 was the second most preferred option with 22%. As part of the survey, the community was also asked to rank certain sustainability areas, focus areas for the airport, and maintaining harmony with the Baylands was the highest focus area. Lastly, there were 2 petitions started over the summer. They both requested signers to protect the Palo Alto Airport or the Palo Alto Baylands from airport expansion. The one on change.org has received approximately 800 signatures as of today, and the other one was submitted to the city with 361 signatures. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andy Swanson, the airport manager, for an update on unleaded fuel.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Oops, sorry. Good evening. To update on the transfer to leaded fuel, we went with oh, next slide, please. Sorry. So we have a draft of a 3-phase process. The first phase, we surveyed pilots who could use the 94 unleaded fuel. We retrofitted a 10,000 gallon tank. And in January this year, we we brought in our first load, and we're actually able to, one of our FBOs to provide the 94. The sales of the 94 has not been as we expected. It's been quite slow. We've been tracking it. It really looks about 1% or so. It's very early on, but it's not selling well. And we're following that with industry, and what's coming up in industry, looking for the 100 drop-in is what would solve the problem with the leaded fuels. It's not here yet today. There are some 2 manufacturers that we're following very close that it's not in California. There are products, one that could be in California soon, another that partially could be ready for the fleet. So it's it's hopeful to be here soon, but we're not counting on it. We're just following it and looking at phase two. Phase two of the plan, we would look. We early on reached out to Cal Public Health in 2022 regarding lead monitoring, and they were looking into a statewide program. We would look to a program of our own if that doesn't come into play. Also tracking the stakeholders in community engagement, trying to get more use of the current 94 and get the 100 unleaded onto the field. We'd also look at our up and coming FBO agreements at the end of June this next year to establish requirements to bring the product to the field. And then moving on to phase three, we would actually look to phase out, if it hasn't happened, we would look to phase out in line by 2026 with Assembly Bill 1193 that I believe is on the governor's desk for consideration right now. So that's kind of a concise kind of overview of where we're at with the 94 and moving to 100 drop-in or tracking industry standards. Thank you. Next slide.
So I'll talk quickly about next steps. I did want to say, I don't think Andy mentioned our uptake on the unleaded fuel has not been good to date. It's currently less than 1% of the av gas that's sold at the airport. So very important that we take these steps. So what's next? We're getting the council feedback from you this evening. We've had some interest from neighboring cities about presentations to their city councils, so we'll plan to pursue that. We will be taking this input to work on development of a preferred alternative and then planning additional public outreach and engagement beyond what's already been done, after which we would come back to city council for review of the preferred alternative. So those are the next steps on the long range plan process itself. Separately, and also very important, is making progress on that fuel transition plan that Andy was just talking with you about. Next slide. And so just wrapping up from our end here, I just wanted to remind you that the feedback that we're most interested today, whatever you want to tell us, but especially in these three areas I was mentioning that we see as kind of key attributes of what goes into a preferred alternative, the kind of sustainable future for the airport. And then again, runway safety standards as listed here, meaning those distances and things that could be accommodated within the footprint. And then separately from that, any guidance on the runway lengths that are in those other alternatives. And with that, we'll turn it back to the council. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As we did on the first study session, we'll do a round of technical questions, then we'll turn to the public, and then we'll come back for council discussion. Just to get a sense of how many public speakers, Madam Clerk, do you have an estimate?
Yes, I do. We currently have 76 requests to speak, and that is including 3 groups.
Okay.
Excuse me, 4 groups.
Okay, wow, that is incredible. So we'll do, we typically do with that many, a minute, but this is such a technical, important issue. We'll do a minute and a half per speaker. So I want the public to be aware that you have about a minute and a half to speak. And of course, you're encouraged, if somebody has already said what you want to say, you can always just come up to the mic and say, and make that clear, because yeah, that's a lot, but appreciate everybody showing up. So let's do a round of technical questions, and then we can get to the public and hear from them. Councilmember Burt.
Thank you. I have a number of questions, but I want to zero in on one that to me kind of leaps off the page. For alternatives 2 through 5, we have the renderings, and we got larger ones here, although one problem is there's no distance scale on these. So that was a real struggle to try to really understand how many feet are being moved where. But on all those alternatives, even including alternative 2, do they not, doesn't the expansion of the runway that would go southward, I'll call it, intrude into dedicated parkland?
So, yeah, yes, the area off the end of the airport, I believe, would be part of the State Land Use Commission's parkland.
No,
area-
the
yeah.
city parkland.
City, okay. And yes,
Okay, and that requires a vote of the people to undedicate.
So I just asked that the public refrain from making
I guess
verbal gestures.
I'm kind of mystified that that's, you're, Andy, you're looking inquisitively, and that is central here. So can I get just a clarification that in fact, alternatives 2 through 5 would in fact require a citywide vote to undedicate the parkland for those to occur?
I believe that's the case. In some of the discussions about these areas, I've also heard that there were some potential complexities about the designation of some of the lands. So we haven't gone and done any analysis on that because at this point, we wanted to get initial feedback from the council.
Well, that initial feedback, and you can't hear me or him?
I can't hear him. I can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm usually pretty loud. That our initial feedback is going to be very dependent on that issue. And so for this to have come to us with so much work having been done on something that really in a lot of ways may be a non-starter in the community, I think is real problematic. So let me ask a second question. When we saw this a year and a half ago, the preliminary presentation in March of 2023, there was a commitment at that time to return to the council approximately by the end of the year. I don't think that ever happened. Is that correct? And if not, why not?
That didn't happen. It took us longer to get far enough along in the process to where we expected to be. And then that we had these community meetings where there was follow-up work coming from this.
Well, I didn't think at that time the anticipation was that all these community meetings and all this level of flushing out alternatives would need to precede that coming to the council. My understanding at the time, and when I reread the staff report from that meeting, was it would be coming back to us really for a screening. And here we have this huge public outcry without the council having had an opportunity to frame these alternatives, and in particular around this issue that an undedication of a minimum of, I guess, alternative 2 is 3.5 acres. Is that 3.5 acres that would have to be undedicated?
yes, if that's
Okay.
the case, yes.
So that's a big deal. And I think that we've created a huge amount of consternation in the community over something that, for that reason, may be nearly a non-starter. I'm supportive of the continuation of the airport. I'm supportive of really the transition of the airport to not only be lead-free, but a sustainable and having a transition to electrified aircraft, I think is very promising. But we're going through a process that is actually creating a backlash in the community rather than moving the ball forward. And I think I understand that there are certain steps that staff had to do to meet the FAA requirements of looking at alternatives. And I don't think that has been framed well enough for the community, what you are obligated to do, even if that's not a recommendation. It appears to the community that for the 5 alternatives, are all going in a direction of expansion. One that's a very modest length expansion, but nevertheless is 3.5 acres of undedication. My interest at that March 31st meeting, which I don't see any response to, but I was told at the time that I'd get an answer to when you came back, was we have had a large strip of airport real estate that is on the bay side of the runway, in between the runway and the levee. And my question at the time was that strip, my understanding is historically that was part of the airport because the second runway was anticipated 30, 40 years ago. That decision has been made long ago and it's not part of these alternatives. And could any of that land actually be dedicated as parkland and move the levee in or not? Now, I understand, or at least I think I understand, that some of the issues, and what you mentioned, Andy, at that meeting is that the FAA had new requirements on buffers. And so let me ask at this time, can you explain what those requirements are? And I know that to some degree we have a reference in the table that you put on slide number 4, but can you explain that a little bit more so that we understand, is all of that buffer area now needed for the latest FAA requirements, or is some of that actually available to be restored to natural habitat, whether wet or dry marsh?
So yes, most of that is required to meet those requirements. And that's why it was very difficult to know that. They had to look into it. We knew the design standards had changed so much, and that, yes, that is correct.
So most is, how much is not?
If I could get that slide up. It goes out right to basically out to the Bay Trail.
It does.
Yeah,
that's
it
the
comes out.
requirement now.
What we did, we looked at, made sure we protected the Bay Trail.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, my hope had been that we wouldn't need all that. And unfortunately, it looks like with the current requirements we do, and that's disappointing, but I'm willing to accept that. All right. Well, I've run over just on my first question, so I'll cede the floor.
Thank you. And a reminder to staff to please speak into the microphone so everyone can hear. Vice Mayor Lowing? Councilmember Koo?
Thank you. So just to continue with the line of questioning with regards to the parkland and undedication, how much parkland will have to be undedicated for each of the proposed alternatives? I mean, this goes into the Baylands, the lagoon, as well as the golf course, right? These alternatives that are being proposed, and really concerning because the golf course was just put together after a lot of money was spent on it. So how much exactly of these dedicated parkland is going to be undedicated?
We did not calculate for alternative 3 on the golf course, but it would be 3.5 acres for alternative 2, 10.5 acres for alternative 4, and 6.5 acres for alternative 5.
That's a lot of parkland. I'd love to hear what is the consideration for the golf course and dedication, and how much land that would be when you return or when this is further considered. How about how much wetland area will need to be filled in for each of the alternatives?
Those were the calculations for the wetlands.
That includes the wetlands?
Correct.
Okay. So the buffer, I believe it's about 320 feet buffer, which separates the runway from the lagoon and wetlands. It's really a part of a mitigation, right? In order for to enable the birds to use the nearby duck pond as well as the lagoon, so that it doesn't cause birds to get onto the runway and so forth. So I think, the question was kind of asked, but I want clarity on that 320 feet buffer to ensure that if it is a part of mitigation, when the wildlife hazard management plan was put in, that it stays that way and that is observed as such. Okay, so I just want to make sure there's a 350 feet buffer in there that is part of the mitigation in order to keep the birds away from the runway and that the birds have a safe place directed back to the lagoon or the duck pond. Is that taken into consideration for all of the alternatives?
So I'd have to defer to our consultant who's on the line. Kim, can you answer that question?
I would have to look really quickly and see what I can find on that.
Thank you. My last question for now is I would like to clarify. So do we have to make any of the changes that's described in alternatives 2 to 5? In other words, are these changes mandated by FAA?
They're not mandated. They're recommendations in the standards. So that's why all of on and off were studied for the aircraft that was over 500 operations. That doesn't mean that all of those have to happen. And that's why the off airport ones, they were considered because it's required part of the program to look at everything, but it's not all required. So
That's very good to know, because as I was reading your report, packet page 38, it says the only thing that FAA requires is an updated ALP or airport layout plan. That's one of the requirements. But in terms of actually conducting the work or building out, it's not a requirement.
No, it's not a requirement.
Very good. Thank you. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Vice Mayor Lowing?
Yeah, so just picking a few of the actually questions, but I'll permit myself one comment, because what Councilmember Byrd said was exactly right. We're trying to increase parkland there on the Bayland side of that airport. So I'm on the Bay side of that airport. So this is kind of going the wrong direction in that regard, and quite likely could be a non-starter. Actually, all of my questions tend to be the top line questions here tend to be environmental as well. What is the time frame? I don't know who can answer this, that we have to get very serious about sea rise out there. And we're looking at the levees and we want there to be natural levees and so on. One alternative is you could raise the existing runway and build it up next to the levee. But I've heard some reports that that's really 20 to 30 years out. So it's not an urgent situation, which means it might not even be apropos to this discussion.
I don't have the answer to that immediately. I will say, we were working for several years with Valley Water and the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps concluded that there's no federal interest in moving forward with that project right now because the damages they saw from sea level rise didn't become significant enough for a number of decades from now. So we're still doing some work to try to better understand that.
Okay, good. Keep doing that work. Because if the federal government doesn't want to look at it, we still want to look at it. But what you said there is consistent with the research that I've done, that it's not an imminent danger like in the next 5 years. The second thing is we don't have to follow assembly bills. If we want to mandate unleaded gasoline, we can do that, correct? Or is there any interference from the FAA on that?
Our grant assurances do require us to follow the federal guidelines for phasing it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we do have to follow our grant assurances, our federal grant assurances.
Can I speak a little more to that? So Andy's right that our understanding of the federal grant assurances is they don't allow us to just cease the sale of a particular fuel. There's also provisions in the FAA Reauthorization Act that have daily fines for any airports that do that. That there's a deadline in that legislation that says if there's not a replacement by 2030, then airports can stop selling the fuel. if you look at the phase transition plan that we were walking through with you, we've essentially given 2 years there to make significant progress. And then even though we're not at 2030 yet, introduced that if we don't have a replacement by 2026, we would come to the council to consider and discuss those steps, even though they could be in violation of grant assurances.
Okay, but in your presentation, I think you referenced an assembly bill that if that went in, that would take priority. How can that trump federal law?
So, no, there is a assembly bill that has gone through, and it's Assembly Bill SB 1193. It does, 2026 is when they request that it be phased out in California. So we would follow that, come back and update you if.
So you'd follow that and not the federal mandate?
We would come
We're
back
not
to
sure
council.
how that bill would apply and understand your point. We did send a letter of support for that bill.
Okay. Let's see, the other one is looking at hangars and solar and all that. Is the intent to create solar to help operate the airport there? Or do you think it could be big enough, or do you have to study this more, to actually be a source of, shipping that solar elsewhere?
All of the above. I'll let Michael answer that just briefly.
Yep, we're looking into exactly what the airport could support with solar on the airfield, including supporting the treatment plant next door and providing electrical chargers for vehicles that could potentially return to their homes and power their homes from the car using the solar energy produced at the airport. So.
Okay. My time's getting short. The issue of hangars, is the idea that the number of planes could be the same? They would just be in hangars, or is the intent with putting up the hangars to attract more planes?
To take care of the planes that are based at the airport now and the need to put them in hangars.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then the 5-foot width issue that's in the staff report in numerous places, that's for the plane that's already coming in. So is that because some of them have different wingspans that are active?
Correct. That's the FAA potential improvement for the Pilatus PC-12, the critical aircraft currently using the airport.
But it's using it, but we still have to make it wider. That's the question. Why is that? I mean, they're already coming in, so why would we widen it?
It's the design standards have changed to accommodate that aircraft.
Okay.
So, yes.
All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, staff, for your presentation. I want to thank my colleagues for their questions about the parkland situation. My question is about this critical aircraft, which seems to be driving the desire to expand. Critical aircraft, as I understand it, is the one with the greatest challenges associated with the present conditions at the airport, and that's the Pilatus PC-12. Do we know what percentage of current trips into and out of the airport, however you count them, involve a Pilatus PC-12?
In 2022, there were approximately 850 IFR flights, that's instrument flight rules at the airport. So we don't have information on how many visual flight rules flights there were, but there were at least 850.
As a percentage of total flights, is how many?
We currently have approximately 160,000 flights, so less than 1%, I believe.
Less than 1% of the flights involve a Pilatus PC-12?
That is correct.
And that's the aircraft we're trying to design these renovations for?
Based on FAA criteria, which defines that critical aircraft as the most demanding aircraft currently using the airport with more than 500. So, yes.
Okay, thank you. Where does our airport currently rank nationally on lead pollution?
I don't have that answer with today, but.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Let me ask a different question. When we draw a radius out from the heart of our airport, what cities are within, say, a half mile of the airport and a mile of the airport? I don't know how you might measure it, whether you use miles or kilometers, but I'm trying to get a sense of who is most impacted and what percentage of those impacts are Palo Alto versus other cities. So whatever information you might have on that is kind of what I'm asking for here.
So it'd be out of the airport, it'd be East Palo Alto, Menlo Park would be the two neighboring cities from the majority of our flights out of the airport.
And when we look at that circle that's defined by the radius, approximately what percentage is Palo Alto versus Menlo Park or East Palo Alto? Okay, thank you. I didn't hear much about eVTOL. These are the devices, a sort of emerging technology, drones, manned, unmanned vehicles. I'm guessing they're electric, but am I right about that? Or, oh, thank you. I'm lucky to sit next to the smartest guy in the room. He is, in fact. Okay, so they're all electric, so they're not going to increase fossil fuels. Okay. That's it for me on this round. Thank you.
Councilmember Vinker.
Thank you. Just in terms of questions, the three things that concern me for this round are leaded gas, ending that use, environmental justice issues, and sea level rise. And so I'm going to start with the leaded gas because, yes, the bill you mentioned is actually Senator Caroline Mendivar's bill, SB 1193, and it is on the governor's desk right now, but it's been amended such that so yes, we are the first in the nation to have a legislature pass a bill that says we will end the sale of leaded aviation fuel, but to get that done, it was put off until, it won't take effect until 2031. So it won't be, originally it was proposed as a slow phase in, and now it's not going to start until 2031. So we can't really depend on that to push us along. We have to do it ourselves per the vice mayor's comments. So my question about that is the things on the slide that showed the different steps we were going to take are terrific. And you mentioned the FBO lease. In the staff report, I think there may have been a typo. It said it expired in June of 2024, but I just want to confirm, I heard you mention during your presentation, it expires next June. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So, and the point of that is that we could enter a new contract at that time, hopefully to get an FBO lease for the unleaded additional fuel. I understand the sales are low. So could you just think out loud or tell me a little bit more about that prospective lease?
So we'd be looking to require that the leases bring unleaded fuel to the field. And right now, even though that's not a requirement, they haven't been able to do it. They've been very anxious and active looking, asking their providers to bring it in. It's not available. Now, there are small quantities in tests, but not volume. And that's been probably our biggest problem with even the 94. We're not moving enough to get the price down. So the hope would be to build those leases to be able to motivate them to bring this fuel to California, get it in, bring it in however they can, and then also to look at alternative charging, electrification, to provide those services to get away from fossil fuels.
So, especially if we're struggling to get the unleaded fuel attracted and available and have a supply of it here, I want to ask about, there was a mention of a lead monitoring program in phase 2. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? I think you mentioned in your comments something about Cal Public Health, working with them. I'm just curious, like, when would we get those results and how would we factor that? How could we factor that into our decision making?
So that was one of one of the components that we're looking at, we're going back to see if there actually is going to be a study statewide, and then if that's not taking place, to look into our own program. And I don't have any more to update on that of how we would do it. We're looking around at industry, and it's been done other places to come back to council with a proposal.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause I encourage you to do that, and thank you for looking ahead to do that. I think that's going to be really important, especially if we're having trouble attracting the unleaded fuel. And that makes me then care a lot about the different options. I think 3 of them actually moved the runways further away from our neighbors. I mean, from at least the flight paths and approaches would be further away from East Palo Alto neighborhoods, for example. My question is, do we know, I guess it's hard without the lead monitoring program to know to what degree, is there any way to quantify to what degree that would improve the situation?
I wouldn't know at this time.
Yeah, so it's too early to tell. Okay. So then let me ask finally about sea level rise. So I understand that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is essentially pulled out in terms of being interested in working with us now, but we're still interested in addressing sea level rise and levee systems. And what I'm curious about is if, we talked about with the options 2 through 4, whether they could be integrated into the series of levees to address sea level rise mitigation. What about if we didn't change the length, if we went with option 1 and kept it there? Is there any way to adjust that runway in situ, same length, to integrate into potential levee systems?
So definitely that could be part of the project if there was on airport and just raising the actual runway now in that area and having it ready, we'd be able to take advantage of the funding for that would actually work as a levee. That was one of the Corps' initial discussions when they looked at that alignment.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm over my time. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. I've got, Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, sorry, I hit the wrong light. A few questions for you guys. Do we have any control over the flight path? I know that's an FAA thing, but since we control the airport, can we say, well, you fly over Palo Alto, you have a higher tax? Or what kind of control do we have, if any?
So we have a voluntary noise abatement procedure that we work with our users, our transient pilots, our tenants on the field, and our businesses. We can't tell the pilots how to fly, but we've actually just started a new software program that we're using that's going to help monitor that in real time, be able to, so if someone's calling in or something, our staff will already know that they have violated that. So we'll follow up, trying to be, a better neighbor and not having we just started this, so we're just learning how it works and how we can utilize that equipment. But to be specific, to actually be able to tell them how to fly, we can't control the
I'm not saying
path.
we tell them how to fly, but because we do have a tax that we charge people, right, to land or take off at the airport, correct? There's like some sort of fee.
Yeah.
Okay, so why can't we say, well, look, if you fly over Palo Alto, you're going to charge you extra? Why can't we do that? Here, let me move it closer. Can you hear me now?
So we couldn't charge a tax for flying over. The airport couldn't.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Okay. And how much, I saw that this generates about 30-something million, I guess $37.8 million, right? But what I didn't understand and I couldn't find was how much profit does this bring to the city?
So as far as taxes,
Yeah.
and we're looking into that. I'd like to give you an answer because the taxes, we're getting those numbers from the county, and I had staff looking into it. We don't have those numbers at this time, but we will.
Okay, I guess what would be interesting to know is how much does it do now? And, with these different alternatives, how much would we get?
We can look into that.
Well,
yes.
to be clear, Councilmember, I think perhaps where you're driving from a financial perspective, a fiscal perspective, there is no profit from the airport. The airport runs as an enterprise where any revenues generated there stay at the airport. And in fact, the city has traditionally subsidized the operation of the airport. I believe what Mr. Swanson is referring to is economic impact, which could be a different calculation, but I suspect is not what you're asking
Well,
about.
no, actually, I am looking for that. Right? I kind of want to understand the net economic benefit the airport brings. So
Yeah.
it would be good to know that.
That would be a larger study that is not a part of what we're doing here.
Okay, well, I think for me to make a decision, I would really like to know that. Maybe others don't care, but I care. Okay, and then which came first, the Palo Alto Airport or East Palo Alto? That's at the end of the runway.
I'm not sure we know the history on that going back that far, Councilmember.
Okay, I actually looked it up. So the airport came first. Actually, I didn't realize that. So 1935, the airport was built in 1935, and then East Palo Alto was 1983. So, anyway.
Excuse me again, please withhold your comments. We'll have public comment shortly after this. Thank you.
So, anyways, so I found that interesting. And then eVTOL. So I guess there's also helicopters that take off there right now, right?
Yeah, helicopters.
Okay. How is that different from eVTOL? Like what's different about it?
So it's very similar. It uses most of the, there's all different types of eVTOLs, but most of them use multiple engines more than, like 5.
Oh, no, I know the
yeah.
technical difference. I just don't understand what's different about the airport. I mean, I know that the eVTOLs can take off and land vertically, but what has to be different about the airport? I mean, versus just a helicopter pad.
The design standards are different than for the eVTOL port versus the helicopter port. They're not a lot different, but there is a different standard.
Okay.
And they're electric and don't use fossil fuels, to be clear.
Yeah. So I guess, is the standards higher than a helicopter or less?
I'd say just different. They're the way they operate and the way it's designed. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just have a few questions. If you haven't had a chance to put your speaker card in, please do so now because we'll close off public speakers once we begin. Already good discussion, good questions. So currently our airport is accessible for Group 1 aircraft, which is aircraft with a 49-foot wingspan. So would all alternatives but alternative 1, which is the alternative to do nothing, then allow for Group 2 aircraft, which has a wingspan up to 79 feet?
I think Group 2 aircraft are currently operating at the airport. That is what the Pilatus PC-12 is.
Well, but just 1%, right?
Correct.
Okay. So 99% is Group 1, 1% is Group 2. Of current flights.
There are other aircraft in Group 2 that would be operating. I don't know the exact percentage of the flights for that.
And
yeah, I think we'd have to defer to our consultant because they did those numbers. There's actually other aircraft like B-2s that operate out of there too. And, so it's a majority of different ones, but
But at least it was a vast majority of the current aircraft is Group 1.
I'd have to defer to the consultant. We don't have those numbers.
Do we have the consultant on?
Yeah.
Okay, let's ask the consultant.
Kim or Mike, can you answer that question?
I am just trying to pull up the information now, but one thing while I'm pulling this up that I want to make sure to bring up is the fact that the data that we had to go off of to do the critical aircraft to actually have operation information for each flight. The only data that we had to go off of was the information that Michael had mentioned before, where instrument flight rules are being used. So while there's 160 some odd thousand operations, only a percentage of those are tracked where we can identify the type of aircraft that are being used. With that being said, when you look at that information, then we figure out how many aircraft are operating, or we actually can break down those operations to understand how many of which type of aircraft are using. But when Michael had said that there was 858, I believe it was, PC-12s, that's 858, documented operations of PC-12s. That is not giving us how many of the total 160 some odd thousand operations are PC-12s. So the airport does not have the exact number of operations of the PC-12. We can give you a percentage of the IFR operations that are PC-12, but we are not going to be able to determine what percentage of the 160 some odd thousand operations are PC-12.
Okay, well, what percentage of the ones that you've tracked?
Okay, hold on. So the PC-12 was 842. That's just not a number that we had to figure out. So I need to, so it's 842 out of the 5,002. So 16% of the operations data that we have for actual aircraft, 16%.
Okay, and PC-12 would be considered a group 2 aircraft?
And yep, and A2, yep.
Okay, thank you. So at least from what we have there, vast majority is group 1. So another question, and thanks to the consultant, you were loud enough, so appreciate it. Once we have expanded capacity for larger planes or eVTOL vertiports, our airport, we would no longer have discretion to reject certain planes from landing, because my understanding is the FAA has that authority since we accept federal grants.
That's correct.
Okay. So I think, okay, and essentially anything above alternative 1 expands it into the group 2. So I think my great concern is it's kind of, if we build it, they will come. So if we build an expanded airport, larger and more frequent planes will come. That's a concern. And then one final question just on safety, since we're running out of time. What data do we have on runway or taxi collisions, close calls in landings or takeoffs? So I think safety was mentioned in the report for justification potentially of expansion. So I'm wondering if staff can cite specific examples of why those concerns were raised within the report.
So with today's conditions or the existing conditions versus even the on-field updates, the aircraft that are using the airport today, the design standards have changed. So that makes that an issue, a concern. And that data is collected not only from one airport, it's across the nation. And so that's how they come up with those design standards. We don't have any specific data that shows at our airport, but it's across the nation. So that's how they design that. So there's nothing really that points to the specific airport. It's if that makes sense.
So the design standards are a little outdated, but no actual evidence to show that planes are any more danger than they were before.
No, not.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, then that will end our round of questioning. We can go to public comment. And how many do we have, Madam Clerk?
We have 91 requests to speak.
Okay.
And 4 groups.
So again, Usually we do a minute, we do a minute and a half because this is technical, a lot of public interest. Again, we'll kind of encourage the public, if you can associate yourselves with comments that a prior speaker made, we also look favorably at that. I'm sure everybody will be very appreciative if we can get through this a little faster than everybody, if you're able to. But of course, you have the full minute and a half. Also, just ask, because I know we're a spirited group and this is an important topic, if you can refrain from making any comments, both positive or negative. This is a scary place to be. Speaking at the microphone, and it makes it much more challenging if you're concerned about how other people are going to react. So let's all just respect each other in our comments, even if we disagree, and we'd all appreciate that. So with that, let's begin.
Our first speaker is Emily R., followed by Enid P. Enid P. But first speaker, Emily R.
This on? Mayor Stone and members of the council, I'm Emily Renzel, 1056 Forest. I hope you've had a chance to read my letter of September 8th regarding the long-term planning for the Palo Alto Airport. I was on the City Planning Commission and City Council when we adopted the first Baylands Master Plan and then subsequent ones required by the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. That plan was updated in 2008 and has a policy of maintaining the current airport footprint and level of operation. Baylands Master Plan is also adopted by reference in the Palo Alto Comprehensive Plan. Any use of parkland will require a public vote. Please recognize that increasing the footprint or flight operation levels will adversely impact adjoining park-dedicated natural areas, including our beloved duck pond. There will always be demand for the latest technologies, but the city should recognize that the Baylands are a precious and irreplaceable natural resource and please limit the airport to its current level of activity. I urge you to adopt option 1, which is our current policy in the Baylands Master Plan and Comprehensive Plan. After I wrote this, I did listen to the testimony here. The airport has almost always been subsidized in one manner or another. And when the city first moved it to the Baylands, they leased it to the county. Is my time up?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. But anyway, then the county found that it wasn't economic and sent it back.
Our next speaker is Enid P., followed by Darlene Y.
Oh boy, this is interesting. Okay, Mayor Stone and members of the City Council. My name is Enid Pearson, and I can't read this. Let's see. Okay, and I'm at 1019 Forest Court, Palo Alto. And back in the days when my former husband and I had an airplane, I learned to fly at the Palo Alto Airport. I also feel strongly about protecting the natural baylands. 60 years ago, God, that was in 64, I organized the effort to adopt a park dedication charter amendment because the city was attempting to use parkland for non-park uses. High-rise apartments were proposed for El Camino Park. A fire station was located on Mitchell Park, and many other parks were being eyed for city facilities. The park charter amendment passed with 90% in favor. Oh, let's see. When the Palo Alto Airport was moved to the Baylands, and you probably all remember, it used to be on El Camino. It was a much smaller operation and it has grown incrementally over time. Airport operations have a huge impact on nearby natural areas. There's noise, crashes, air quality, and traffic disturbs wildlife and people alike. In 2008, the city adopted a revised Baylands master
Your
plan
time is up.
that limited the airport to its 2008 footprint and operational level, recognized a higher importance of protecting our natural baylands.
Your time is up.
Read it.
Okay, please adopt option 1 that continues to limit the airport to its current footprint and activity level. Thank you for your time.
Unfortunately, your time is up.
Good
Our
grief.
next speaker is Darlene Y.
This is not our first rodeo. We've been working on aviation issues for 9+ years. Next slide, please. We already have too many aviation impacts. A typical day, May 19, 2023, near Eleanor Party Park, 2 miles from PAO, 328 noise events over 24 hours, 217 from San Francisco and 66 or 20% from PAO. Look at the purple dots. These planes are just as loud as SFO and sometimes louder. PAO is safe. If it wasn't, the FAA would force PAO to change. This is not the case. FAA criteria are not requirements. Therefore, no action is required. Furthermore, safety was not on the 19 airport issues listed from stakeholders in the staff report, page 19. Next slide, please. Seemingly small expansion equal more planes and bigger planes. Alternatives 2 to 5 call for increases in the runway, width, length, and separation, and another taxiway. This might not seem like a lot, but it is. Why? You're trying to do efficiency. A second taxiway allows many more operations. Number 2, enables bigger planes larger than the PC-12s to use PAO. Alternatives 2, 4, and 5 shift the runway further away from nearby neighborhoods is misleading. The shift was not quantified. It looks like 100 feet or so. This will not decrease noise over East Palo Alto. You would need to move the runway at least 1/4 mile for a perceptible noise decrease near the airport. Next slide, please. The FAA has airport designs based on the size of wingspan, such as group 1 and 2. The longer the wingspan, the wider and longer the runway must be. Ditto, this for separation between taxiway and runway. Today, the runway is 70 feet wide, designed for group 1 planes with planes less than 49 feet wingspan. Approximately 99% of PAO operations are group 1 planes. PC-12s typically are private chartered jets that can seat 10 people. The FAA criteria puts PC-12s in Group T2 because of their wingspans are between 53 and 53.4 inches long. That said, PC-12s can still operate at PAO Category 1 airport. PC-12s operate at PAO because the current runway is long enough for them, and the runway is the #1 factor for pilots. Planes are not prohibited to use an airport based on the FAA aircraft group. Instead, pilots decide what airports are safe for them to use based on their understanding of the plane weight, length, runway, and some pilots can decide if they feel it's safe. PAO is safe for some Group 2 planes, but would not be safe for all Group 2 planes, which can be much bigger than a PC-12, like the de Havilland Twin Otter 20-seat plane versus the PC-12 10-seat. The FAA identified deficiencies, but these deficiencies are based on Group 2. They are not deficiencies based on Group 1, which represent 99% of today's PAO ops. Alternatives 2 to 5 redesign the airport, accommodate more planes, and all planes in Group 2 will lead to more noise, more lead, more emissions on residents, plants, and wildlife. Can we go back to the previous slide, please? A new vertiport on the right side is premature. It's an emerging field with much higher volume of operations than GA. You don't know what to expect in terms of number of operations, noise impacts, safety, privacy, or visual pollution. Electric aircraft are quieter, but volumes are going to be hundreds and thousands per day. 10 eVTOLs a day may be better to replace 10 planes, but we're not replacing all planes alone. Instead, we're going to add more plane types and more planes. eVTOL will create new lower altitude flight paths over communities. Yes, even lower than today. The FAA does not allow airports to control the number of operations. So once you do this, we can't dial anything back. Council needs to understand these consequences before making a decision. Suspend eVTOL until potential impacts are evaluated. Sustainability. More planes won't achieve the 80% goal to reduce carbon emissions. Planes are the worst emission offenders, especially private jets. Electrification should be to reduce impacts, not to grow operations. And yes, solar panels can be done if it doesn't increase the footprint. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Please don't take off my time. How about the ethical and moral issues regarding environmental justice? More Black and non-white Hispanic residents live within 500 meters and 1 kilometer of the airport, when compared to other county demographics. We should not increase more disproportionate impacts on them. Next slide. PAO ranked number 19 in the top lead polluting US-wide airports. Reed Hillview, that may close in 2031 because of their lead study, is ranked number 34. The proposed alternatives 2 to 5 enable more operations and bigger planes. Council has sole jurisdiction of the airport design. It's not necessarily or required for safety, and it will aggravate impacts on our residents and neighbors. Please give direction for alternative 1, no action, and study eVTOL impacts before committing to any new vertiport. Thank you.
Again, just as a reminder, if you could refrain from applause or verbal remarks. All right, our next person. I know staff is working on the mic issue.
Our next speaker is Avro S.
Good evening, Council. Oh, that's a little. I hope you're all doing well and enjoying these final moments of summer while it's still warm. My name is Avro Shaw, and I'm a sophomore at Palo Alto High School. I'm here tonight in my role as the head, as a co-lead of the outreach committee at the Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition, or PASC. I'm someone who's been working on climate action initiatives since 3rd grade. And while I've only been involved in city level action for about a year, I've learned one thing from that. Palo Alto's residents deeply value our accessible outdoor spaces, especially our baylands. Tonight, I want to emphasize why protecting the baylands must remain a priority for our city. Next slide, please. But before I do that, I want to share a quick video showing what it's like to be in the baylands, even with the smallest planes flying ahead. If you could play the video. Okay, I'm learning that the video will not play, but the basic takeaway from that is it's very loud. And I also want to say that, that loud noise pollution, you can go to the next slide. That noise pollution, it affects East Palo Alto residents. It affects our neighbors in Palo Alto who live near the airport, and airplanes will occasionally fly over our homes in Palo Alto. So it affects everyone, but it disproportionately affects people living near the airport, and that's not okay, and that's something that needs to be addressed. I also want to say that we should not forget that the baylands have been drastically altered. Over 90% of the baylands have been filled in during, especially back in the 60s, when the developing on the Baylands across the Bay Area was a norm of civilization. But now we have the responsibility to protect what's left of this precious ecosystem. An ecosystem that gives homes to endangered species that are only native to here, such as the salt marsh harvest mouse. Next slide. I wanted to share a few images from my experiences at the Baylands. And the bottom middle image shows an area behind the duck pond that would be filled in under alternative 2 or 4 of the expansion alternatives. And as you can see in that photo, there's a lot of birds and a lot of animals and a lot of wildlife who are feeding, and they use that area as a habitat. Do we really want to destroy that? Next slide, please. I also want to talk a little bit about what the Baylands do for Palo Alto. They provide a habitat for many organisms, from birds in the Pacific Flyway to endangered species like the salt marsh harvest mouse to the Ridgway's rail. They are a natural carbon sink that does carbon sequestration. They are #1 protection against sea level rise, and they are crucial for flood control. That means even developing on a single inch of the Baylands could be detrimental to how we experience sea level rise and how we experience flooding. They also do a lot for groundwater recharge, and they do a lot for recreation and education and tourism. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the consequences of expansion. We're putting endangered species at risk. And as you see on these maps from the 2022 noise report, we are going to only increase noise pollution. And you can see the bottom image shows the distribution of noise pollution. We're only going to make this worse if we expand the airport. Aircraft engines produce almost the loudest human-made noises, from 120 to 140 decibels, yet exposure over 45 decibels can lead to really bad health effects. I also want to talk about how we don't want to increase our carbon emissions and dependency on leaded fuel. And if we can't ban leaded fuel, we should at least be providing incentives, and we should do work to make sure that we don't have lead going into the air, because we are the 19th most lead intensive airport, and we don't want to be that. We want to be an airport that, if we even have an airport, it has to be healthy. And I want to emphasize that we also don't want to block our trails. We don't want to bring the airport closer to historical buildings, which weren't even considered by the staff when they made that community survey. We don't want to bring the airport closer to the duck pond where people visit on a daily basis. And we don't want to bring the airport closer to our East Palo Alto neighbors. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about the community support that we've seen for the Baylands. We've collected over 2,000 signatures from the 2 petitions, and I'll be presenting today a petition with 1,792 signatures. We've also seen over 80+ letters written to the Palo Alto City Council from June 10th to, I think, September 8th to protect our Baylands and our communities. This includes letters from the League of Women's Voters, from former council members, and from several other organizations, from the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter to the Silicon Valley Bird Alliance, Santa Clara Valley Bird Alliance, sorry. I've also held hundreds of conversations myself, and I know other past members have also been doing the same with residents and also nearby communities who are scared that they're going to be impacted by this, and who are scared that their precious outdoor spaces in the Baylands that they frequently visit are going to be impacted by this. We've seen posters contributed by just random people saying, we want to help with this. And we've seen a bunch of organizations come together and say, we don't want this. And you'll be hearing from a lot of them today. Next slide, please. I also want to say that, none of the alternatives that were presented are good. We want sustainability and we want a safe airport, but we don't want to impact the Baylands and we don't want to impact our communities. So I urge you, council members, protect the Baylands, our climate, and our future without hurting safety and our communities. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Shawnee Kay.
Good evening. Very crowded here today. It's good.
I'm Shani Kleinhaus with the Santa Clara Valley Bird Alliance. I have to get used to that. We're no longer the Audubon Society, I'm happy to say. And also a Parks and Rec Commissioner, but I do not speak for the Parks and Rec Commission. I just wanted to answer really good questions you've asked tonight. Some of those questions are things that I actually kind of noted. Any of the 4 alternatives that would expand the airport would require undedication of parkland, either in the Baylands Nature Preserve or the park or the golf course. So any of those would require vote for the people. And I think you can see here that the sentiment is pretty clear. The ones that extend the runway will extend it into jurisdictional wetlands that are not only part of our baylands, they're also part of mitigation that was put in place by the Army Corps of Engineers many, many years ago. And that mitigation is supposed to preserve the lagoon that envelopes the duck pond. And we can't really build in that. That's, you can't pave that wetland and put a runway on it because it's mitigation land that we, Palo Alto, committed to preserve forever. So the next thing is whether is the area that is not yet built, and all the alternatives have something, whether the runway moves or there's a taxiway or there's parking closer to the Bay Trail and closer to wetlands. If that infrastructure is moved into that open space, I think both Councilmember Burt and Koo asked about that space, that would bring the noise and the activity much closer to the Bay Trail and the people who enjoy it, but also to the Baylands. And then it's not clear that a new wildlife management, hazard management plan will not have to be prepared to make sure that there's no birds there. And so I think answers to that are important to bring up. The increasing, like Darlene Yapley says, increasing the width of the runway, separation of the runway, additional taxiways, all of that allows bigger planes that belong to the class. So that will allow bigger planes and a lot more traffic. That will impact the Baylands clearly, but also the communities nearby. One of the things that surprised me is that there wasn't a lot of discussion of any of that in the staff report. The responses to the staff report mentions Baylands Nature Preserve only once, and that says that it's a key issue where we need to integrate facilities with the adjacent Baylands Golf Links and Baylands Nature Preserve. That's the only mention of the preserve. That's kind of surprising given that it's really important to the public. The word park also appears only once, and that is where the community wanted the airport to be harmonious with the park. Well, it never was, but okay, the airport is there. So I just thought that this was surprising. I think I still have a few minutes that I can give back to you. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Dashil L, followed by Vincent W.
Hello, my name is Dashiell Leeds. I'm the Conservation Coordinator for the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter, also representing our chapter's Bay Alive campaign. The Palo Alto Baylands are a precious resource for our community and wildlife. 280 species of birds have been recorded in the Baylands Nature Preserve, including the common yellowthroat and Alameda song sparrow, which makes this the longest checklist for any birding hotspot in the country. Migratory birds rely on the wetlands to survive and thrive, which is a large reason why we oppose any action to expand the footprint of the airport, increase air traffic, or encroach on the baylands or undedicate parkland. The voice of the community has been strong against the expansion of the airport. In the survey, the no project alternative was by far the most popular alternative with 43.3% of the votes. with an additional 12.8% of votes supporting the closure of the airport entirely. Combined, that's 56% of all votes cast against expansion. And of the several focus areas presented in the survey, the most popular option was maintaining harmony with the Baylands. And as noted by Avro, quite eloquently, petitions against the expansion of the aircraft have received well more than 1,750 signatures. I hope you've had the opportunity to review the letter that we sent in collaboration with 13 other organizations representing environmental groups, environmental justice groups, climate, nature, and community-based organizations. In the letter, we expressed our strong preference for the no expansion alternative. All of the expansion alternatives, that's 2, 3, 4, and 5, would require parkland to be undedicated, which, as we've heard tonight, will require a vote. They also move operations closer to the Bay Trail and the wetlands while facilitating larger aircraft at an increased activity level. This means more emissions, more leaded fuel, more noise and air pollution for residents of Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and East Palo Alto, and of course, more pavement. Alternatives 2, 4, and 5 would destroy migratory bird and endangered species habitat, including species such as the ridge-race whale, salt marsh harvest mouse. These alternatives would also pave mitigation wetlands. Palo Alto's 2030 comprehensive plan calls for the city to act in accordance with the 2008 Baylands Master Plan, protecting open spaces as vital sources of public health, natural beauty, and enjoyment. The plan emphasizes the importance of preserving and protecting bay marshlands, sloughs, creeks, and the wetlands as functioning habitats and elements of an interconnected wildlife corridor. The Baylands Master Plan expressly forbids intensified airport use or significant intrusion into open space, including the duck pond and lagoon. As noted by the Honorable Emily Renzel in her letter to council and in her comments tonight, the loss of wetlands contradicts the Baylands Master Plan in this way. So please go with the no action alternative. Do not expand the airport into parkland. Do not encroach on the wetlands. Do not expand the operational capacity or increase air traffic of the airport. We do support the placement of solar panels over areas that have existing pavement on them, and we do support actions to expedite a ban on the sale of leaded fuel in anticipation with state and federal legislation. Thank you for your time and consideration, and thank you so much to the volunteers who so graciously lent me their time tonight to speak. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Vincent W., followed by Jennifer L.
While Vincent is coming up, if I can ask everyone, when you see your name about to come up, if you maybe can move forward to the front of the room so we can have a seamless transition. All right, sorry, Vincent, go ahead.
All right, thank you. My name is Vincent Wilkins. I'm been flying out of Palo Alto Airport for 40 years, and I am an Angel Flight pilot for over 21 years. And I do believe that I thank the city of Palo Alto for taking over the airport from Santa Clara County, and I appreciate you not doing any knee-jerk reactions with the fuel as they have done, because it's now about it's the last airport in Santa Clara County that provides fuel for my plane. And as along with that, I want to make sure that everybody who flies, whoever uses the airport. I know we're pilots like myself and who are tenants there. We're not the majority of Palo Alto residents, but we are going to be directly impacted. And I believe that a slightly longer runway would add some safety elements to the airport. And for a Silicon Valley pillar in Silicon Valley, which Palo Alto is, the airport certainly could use upgrades in its terminal, tower, and hangars. So outside of that, I would like to just make a couple observations that Palo Alto is a major training ground for lots of pilots, including myself.
Your time is up. Our next speaker is
I didn't get 5 minutes.
Our next speaker is Jennifer L., followed by Sally T.
Sorry, and to clarify, the last 4 groups got 6 minutes because they were group speakers. People ceded their times, which is allowed under our rules. Individual speakers will get 1.5. The groups were given 6, but that's because they had a group of speakers. Go ahead.
Thank you.
The city has accepted FAA grants from a grantor that denies community concerns about noise. And the FAA doesn't call the plans for an electric aircraft vertiport a second airport, which is what it is, with noise impacts that could surpass the current airport. As a reminder, Palo Alto residents are the lead investors in the city, including the airport. We care about your decisions, not just as residents, but how they impact our neighbors. Whereas the FAA and aviation companies are not exposed to the noise, only we will be paying for the consequences of bad decisions. As a stakeholder, I have 3 requests. Number 1, call the FAA's vertiport what it is, a second airport. Number 2, establish citizen oversight for the airports and grants. The city has more policies for sidewalk repair than for the airport. Number 3, please respond to the suggestions from Sky Posse Palo Alto about noise to put people's health first. Thank you. Well, last but not least, you are aware that the environmental review does not consider, it looks at runway layouts, but not the noise. That comes after. This is like buying a house and you agree to be given the actual location and the size after you pay without recourse. Shouldn't this level of exposure go to voters? And last thing, trains, cars, and airplanes are very different in terms of, I should say, electric.
Your time
And
is
why
up.
take my word for it? Commission a study to compare that noise. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sally T, followed by Ashok K.
Good evening. I'm Sally Tomlinson, a 40-year resident of Palo Alto, 33-year volunteer with Environmental Volunteers, 15-year member of Rotary. I speak today for myself. Our Community Services Department estimates that 600,000 people visit the Palo Alto Baylands Preserve every year. They come to enjoy nature, not airplanes. Between 1920 and 1960, Palo Alto acquired what once was a vast marshland between what is now 101 and the Bay, and has filled it in and converted it to the various components that exist today, leaving a sliver of nature there that we now enjoy. Now the airport wants to take even more of that natural habitat for the benefit of a few privileged flyers at the expense of the hundreds of thousands of people who come to enjoy nature, as well as the expense of the ecosystems themselves. My choice would be to remove the airport entirely, but I see the continuation of the airport within its current constraints as a compromise, and I urge you, please do not expand the airport. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ashok K, followed by Alan M. Ashok K. Moving to our next speaker, Alan M, followed by Cecilia T.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Alan Markham. I'm a Palo Alto resident for 44 years, and I'm an environmentalist. We had many visits with our kids when they were young to the duck pond. We've enjoyed walking in the Baylands innumerable times and consider the Baylands a critical resource. I'm also a private pilot. I learned to fly at Palo Alto over 40 years ago. Yesterday, I flew a trip for Project Lighthawk, an environmental and conservation organization, taking people over the Tubbs fire to talk with them and show them the effects of wildfire mitigation. I've also done several trips for Angel Flight West, including bringing Kelly from Placerville for cancer follow-up, enabling her to see her kids off to school in the morning and be home in time to have dinner with them. That's a significant improvement in her and her family's quality of life. I've attended public meetings. I've reviewed the alternatives. I think Palo Alto Airport is a critical resource to this area. Work on the ramps and the taxiways over the past few years is very much appreciated. The runway is critically short, has a bad hop in it, and it's become a safety issue and has been for a while. The airport needs work. The terminal is dated. Even 100 feet to the runway length will make a difference. We need to keep the airport viable and live well with the Baylands. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cecilia T, followed by Andrew B.
Good evening, Mayor Stone and City Council members. Thank you for your service to the City of Palo Alto. I am Cecilia Taylor, a resident of Menlo Park. I am also on the Menlo Park City Council, serving this year as mayor. I did submit a public comment to you all on the website. I hopefully you all had a chance to read it. This evening, I come in public to speak to you as a resident, for myself and for my family. I have two requests for your consideration. The first is to do an assessment on the emissions impact of the Palo Alto Airport on communities underneath the airport's flight path and neighboring communities. This is East Palo Alto, Menlo Park's District 1 and 2, and North Fair Oaks. These communities have little tree canopy, bad air quality, extreme heat impacts, in addition to being surrounded by highways and freeway. My second request is for you to consider having a limited flight or a no-fly zone on days of extreme heat and or bad air quality. The communities underneath the flight path have little tree canopy, as I said earlier, and are impacted by climate impacts. Central City has been smart enough, as most cities, to prioritize climate change and natural environment protection and adaptations. I see these two requests directly related to your priorities. I thank you for your consideration, and I appreciate your service.
Our next speaker is Andrew B, followed by Thomas M.
Good evening. I've learned that planning is easy following one simple rule. You don't care about the outcome. Airport development introduces multiple competing demands: aviation, environment, safety, federal laws. Balancing them to optimally advance each requires effort, creativity, and intelligence. Palo Alto is home to great minds who solve many of the world's complex problems, pressing problems. I appeal to the council to lean on deep answers and to miss simple priority proposals. Community is about whole solutions, collaborating with neighbors, not suffocating the interests of those one doesn't align with. As a pilot, I seek airport modernizations and improvements, notably a lengthened runway and benefits to the community, such as observation areas. I also value our beautiful Bay Area. I walk the Baylands and, in fact, use aviation to take in the beauty from above and to show others. I'm also an Angel flight pilot, bringing those with critical treatments to Palo Alto, where they most often need to come. I would happily use unleaded fuels and quieter electric aircraft and safer flight technology as soon as available and within my means. We want to address multiple goals, but they require balance and expertise from the stakeholders to achieve. Thank you for not entertaining simple, non-community approaches that ignore any significant stakeholders.
Our next speaker is Thomas M, followed by Andrew P.
First of all, thank you to the City Council and the City of Palo Alto for providing a rarer and rarer resource to the world, and that's the Palo Alto Airport. I'd like to provide you with a very critical piece of information that I think will be very important to provide a counterintuitive argument as to why runway lengthening is actually beneficial. And that's this. I'm board chair of West Valley Flying Club. We're the world's largest flying club. Approximately 300 to 500 people come to the airport to learn how to fly every year that we teach. These people look down at a 2,400-foot runway, and unless their glide path and flight path is perfect, they have no choice but to go around. And because approximately 50% of our flights are training flights, you can just imagine the number of go-arounds that we have. If we had a longer runway, even slightly longer, we could cut down significantly on the number of go-arounds. That keeps more planes from waiting to land, keeps more planes from waiting to take off, which means that we can decrease the airport's footprint on the environment and the world by lengthening the runway even a little. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Andrew P., followed by Ben H.
As a reminder, please refrain from clapping. If you want to, you can raise your hand to show support for the last public commenter.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Pollock, and I manage Advantage Aviation, one of the largest tenants at the airport. I think contrary to the fears of many here in the room, the airport business community is not seeking an expansion of the airport, nor an increase in the number of operations or the types of aircraft using the field. Rather, we have three objectives, all achievable within the current outline of the airport boundaries: to improve efficiency, safety, and sustainability. We can improve efficiency by adding a second parallel taxiway, which decreases waiting time for airplanes and reduces the incidence of aircraft having to wait to land, which reduces community noise impacts and fuel usage. We can increase runway and taxiway separation, which enhances safety at the airport, again, within current boundaries. And finally, we can enhance sustainability by adding sunshades that allow us to generate electricity and feed it back into the city grid. We can replace aging infrastructure with more energy efficient and sustainable buildings, and have a better situated terminal building to act as a gateway to the city. So in conclusion, I would like to suggest that it need not be viewed as a question of winners and losers. There's enough room out there for everyone to utilize the Baylands, to preserve the Bayland environment, and for the airport to continue sustainably as it has for over 100 years. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ben H., followed by Vicky R.
Good evening. I hear a lot of comments about option 0 or option 1 to do no action, but I want to remind the council and the public that that is a missed opportunity. The planning process is not an expansion process. It's a process to understand how we can access federal funds to enhance safety, enhance the airport, and modernize it for the benefit of everybody. Improving things like airport runway length can improve safety, as we just heard. Adding taxiways can increase separation, which further improves efficiency and reduces noise. And moving the vertiport can move those types of aircraft operations further from the Baylands. But again, this process is a process to understand what to do next. It's not an expansion process, and there are very few parties that are advocating for expansion. So I just hope that the public and the council remembers we need to do something to enhance the airport. Option 1 doesn't allow us that opportunity. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Vicky R., followed by Deborah L.
Good evening, City Council. I am a native of the Bay Area, born and raised. I reside in Bellhaven, and I echo a lot of what my neighboring resident has stated as far as the very low tree canopy. One thing that wasn't mentioned is the highest rate of asthma, the highest rate of pollution in East Palo Alto and in East Menlo Park. Also, I think something that I haven't heard is our mental health piece. And that's what these parks bring us. I was just there on Sunday, and it's perfect the way it is, and it's maintained beautifully. The only disruption I have are planes. And I agree that maybe on days where our pollution is very high, that we should consider not having them, just like they have other air controls when it's hot. And also, I think when we're out there at the Bixby Park or at the duck pond, or we can access the water there, it really is a sense of getting away from everything that we deal with. Most of our communities are the ones that are being affected the most by the gentrification, by all the housing, by the pollution. And when I get over there, it takes me away. I get to relax. I get to be on the water. I don't see any concrete buildings. I don't see any roads. I see birds and I see people appreciate it, running, biking, and it's beautiful. And I'm totally in support of safety for the airport. I think if anything, the maximum is 100 feet. I don't think we should, I think money's not as important as people.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Deborah L., followed by Peter U.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. I am Deborah Lewis Burgess. I am a resident of East Palo Alto, where I currently serve on the Public Works and Transportation Commission. Tonight, I speak as a resident and for myself. I agree mostly with everything that has been said about the disadvantages of expanding the airport, of which I overwhelmingly concur with. But I would like to address the statement that was made this evening concerning the extensive outreach that was supposedly done in East Palo Alto. The statement is patently untrue, and in a word, it's almost laughable. Very little outreach was done. And yet we are the community that will be impacted the greatest about what's going on. I think through the admission of those presenting tonight that they did not even consider factoring in the matter of dedicated land. I think they also failed to factor in the matter of the real impact that this would have on the city of East Palo Alto. I think any expansion is premature at this time, and I respectfully ask that the council deny any expansion of the airport at this time. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Peter Yu, followed by Alec M.
Good evening, Mayor Stone and Palo Alto Council. My name is Peter Uckman. I'm a Palo Alto resident for the past 30 years, and I am speaking for myself and my family. I'm speaking today in support of option 1, no change to the Palo Alto Airport, specifically due to the negligence committed by the Palo Alto Airport in producing the report that didn't include any modifications and change of parkland. Additionally, no inclusion of airport noise, as it would be changing and increasing with larger planes and more planes. Also, no conversation about the current ongoing impacts from SFO. This meeting has been, I think, I don't know who has been productive for, maybe for some of us in the public, to see how little the Palo Alto Airport has actually done in researching actual impacts to the communities. So that's kind of about it. You know, negligence comes downhill. Let's see what happens.
Our next speaker is Alec M, followed by Carol K.
Hi, Mayor Stone and Council. I'm Dr. Alec Moore, and I urge the Council to support Alternative 1, no action. Like many of us in the Bay Area, I moved here for work. My fiance and I quickly found a community here in Palo Alto. We go to church here, we bike here, and we bird here. Sharing our love of birds is one of the ways that we give back, and we've led multiple outings at the Baylands. Beyond the wonderful biodiversity that makes this an excellent place to observe birds, I love leading outings here because I know that I don't have to worry about it being too strenuous for people to partake. As of the 2022 census, about 15,000 citizens of Palo Alto are over the age of 65 or have a disability. Birdability, an organization that advocates for people with disabilities or mobility concerns, maintains a map of locations that allow individuals to experience the joys of birding. Of the 4 locations reviewed as accessible in Palo Alto, all of them are part of the Baylands Nature Preserve, with the Duck Pond Loop representing one of the most accessible trails available. Disrupting the duck pond would have an inequitably negative impact to the well-being of our seniors and those of us with disabilities. Expanding the airport is a significant negative to our community, to people who are disabled, and to our wildlife. I implore the council to consider the impacts of airport expansion and to choose alternative 1. I see the rest of my time.
Our next speaker is Carol K, followed by Ian I.
Hi, Carol K and Ian I couldn't be here. They asked me to hold this sign. My name's Matt Schlegel. I'm the speaker that goes right after them. I'm a Palo Alto resident, and I'm very
Sorry, Matt,
concerned.
so you're speaking for yourself now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect.
And I am a Palo Alto resident, and I am very concerned about the climate crisis. I'm against expanding the Palo Alto Airport because expanding the built environment in our wetlands is exactly the opposite of what we must be doing in the face of the climate crisis. Wetlands are particularly good carbon sinks. We must preserve our valuable Baylands wetlands and expand them. They sink carbon from the air, and they will serve as a first-line defense against sea level rise. Expanding the airport will increase greenhouse gas emissions. Larger airplanes and increased air traffic capacity will enable even more emissions, which is directly opposed to the city's goal of reducing emissions 80% by 2030. We must preserve, restore, expand our natural wetlands. I strongly urge you to ban the expansion of the Palo Alto Airport. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Chris T, followed by Stuart B.
Mayor Stone and council members, I'm a board member of the Palo Alto Airport, Airport Association, a nonprofit organization that represents the interests of aircraft owners, pilots, and the aviation-related businesses at the airport. I'm here on behalf of Bob Lennox, the president of the association, who's out of town. Palo Alto Airport is an important community asset that is financially self-sustaining using enterprise fund that requires no tax revenues from the city. It provides benefits including light flight access, disaster response, pilot training and education, and business facilitation and job creation. In fact, the airport provides jobs for 130 people and revenues of $30 million a year into the community. An airport master plan is required by the FAA in order to qualify for federal funding for future airport projects. Its approval is an opportunity for the city to gain additional benefits for the community at no cost to the general public. As you've heard tonight, there's a solar farm plan for the airport with funding from the federal government, 90%. And there's also the desire to get a new airport terminal built. The one we have now is over 60 years old. The Palo Alto Airport Association endorses a modernization plan that enhances safety and efficiency from a slightly longer runway, not exceeding 3,000 feet, without increasing the number of aircraft operations or adding larger aircraft. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Stuart B, followed by QS.
Good evening. I'm a pilot and an environmentalist, so I sort of stand with one foot in both areas. I think I have 4 points to make. One is, it's really unclear to me whether we have to undedicate park land to enhance the airport. And I think before we make any decision, we should figure out whether we have to do that and how much we would have to undedicate. Second point is, as an environmentalist, I think all the points made, and particularly by the students here, and I'm proud of the students, are valid points. I'm out in the Baylands several times a week, biking and running, and we don't want to destroy that habitat. I sat on the Palo Alto SCAP board, the sustainability board, so I understand that. I was on the board of the Nature Conservancy for 8 years, board of NRDC, so I appreciate those concerns. As a pilot, I also appreciate what the pilots bring to the community. If people here had a loved one who had cancer in a remote community and had trouble getting to Stanford Airport, you would be thrilled to have a pilot bring that loved one to Palo Alto. If you had a relative that had a disability, needed a canine companion, you'd be thrilled to have this group bring pilots, bring that canine companion to your relative. The last thing I think is important to understand the facts. There's been commentary about big is worse, like the PC-12. PC-12 is actually an unleaded airplane. It climbs faster than other airplanes, so it's less noisy and less troublesome to the neighboring communities like East Palo Alto. And eVTOLs are electric. They also are quieter. So I just think we should understand the facts before we make decisions. Thank you.
Our next speaker is QS, followed by Rebecca E.
Good evening, City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and your service for all of us here. I'm Q Smith, a resident of East Palo Alto, where I serve as the East Palo Alto Planning Commissioner, a senior advisory board member, and a current president of the East Palo Alto Bayshore Rotary Club. I stand here tonight to represent myself and my family and friends, and I will follow the suggestions of the mayor to ditto speakers 1 through 18, except with special emphasis for speaker 3, 4, 12, and 17. Please take people into consideration rather than money and our safety.
Our next speaker is Rebecca E, followed by Or C.
Hi again, Rebecca Eisenberg, personal capacity. Today we debate whether to expand a private plane airport located in the middle of a nature preserve surrounded by the most segregated city in the Bay Area. What we should be doing is acting like our higher integrity neighbors who actually don't have unleaded gas fuel in their airports, it is allowed, and shut our airport down. This is not a consequence-free decision. According to FlightAware, Palo Alto Airport operates an average of 427 flights a day. These 427 flights poison 6,000 human beings every day, with the most harmful impacts on seniors, children, and infants. These people are located in a lower income, intentionally segregated community, East Palo Alto. Why is our airport not in the middle of Palo Alto? Because we don't want this pollution. So why do we give it to our neighbors? They are people too. Lead poisoning is permanent, and it causes irreparable harm to the brain, nervous system, kidneys, and reproductive system. It shouldn't be that when you move into a city, you forego your right to have health. We should have a moral responsibility not to poison our neighbors. And I'm out of time. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Or C, followed by Diane M.
Good evening. My name is Or. I'm a Palo Alto resident, and I've been a resident of the airport for longer than that. A couple of points. In terms of safety, separating the runway from the taxiway further does affect the safety. I've seen in my own eyes an accident where an airplane breached from the runway to the taxiway. If there was another airplane there, that's double the casualties. That did happen in Palo Alto. In terms of the numbers of the PC-12, when you're looking at percentages, a lot of the numbers are students learning to fly. They're doing laps around the pattern. So it's not numbers of how many people coming and going out of Palo Alto, that 160,000 planes, it's landings and takeoffs. So that's not accurate, and you should look at it. And most of it doesn't even go over Palo Alto. It goes over the Bay. In terms of eVTOL, and the noise that you're talking about, I think the majority of the residents of Palo Alto are going to be pissed if they don't have a port to go in and out of when that's the future. That's where we're going. Trains are noisy. I live next to a train, the train tracks, and it's noisy, but I'm glad I have a train station to go in and out of. So thinking about the eVTOL port is a big consideration. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Diane M, followed by Faith B.
Good evening. September 20th is the Moonlight event at the Palo Alto Bayland Preserve, benefiting nonprofits supporting kids and their families. September 21st and 22nd, the city and Caltrans are sponsoring the event, Electric Service Launch Party, celebrating electric trains. September 28th, the city is sponsoring Clean Air at Home to help people learn the best ways to create clean air inside and out of their homes. Events to support children and families, cleaner air, and electric trains. And yet the city may be considering plans to let the airport expand, resulting in dirtier air, unrelenting noise of aircraft to Palo Alto and surrounding communities, and danger to precious wildlife and habitat. Don't be fooled. Plans to expand the runway is not all for safety reasons. It is to provide more available occurrences for larger and more frequent aircraft and companies like the Pilatus C-12s and Surf Air, currently plaguing the neighborhoods in San Carlos. Look outside the box. Palo Alto Airport, contract and use Moffett Field. Now that's the best example of reusing and repurposing. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Faith B, followed by Mark D.
Good evening. Yes, I'm Faith Brigel. We're happy with the Baylands just the way they are. Many people, both local from Palo Alto, from East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Redwood City, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and other states go to the Baylands. The last few months I've been going and I've been talking to the people there, even though I'm kind of shy. I've been asking them if they know about the airport expansion. None of them knew about it. None of them knew about it. And when I spoke to some locals from Palo Alto, that there have been a few, I've heard that there have been a few meetings. They said they haven't heard about any meetings. So the meetings have not been well publicized. There are other airports that could be used: San Carlos, San Jose, San Francisco, Moffett Field, but there is only one duck pond and there's only one Bayland area that, as you can hear, the majority of the audience here tonight love and want to keep. I really urge you to not make any changes to the Baylands and the duck pond. It is fine the way it is. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mark D., followed by Carol Mueller.
Hi, good evening, Council, Mayor Stone, and a shout out to Lydia Koo, who was actually my realtor when we bought our house in East Palo Alto. I live next to the Bay Trail. I'm right next to the airport. I'm out there twice a day walking my dogs. The Palo Alto Airport is, simply put, a terrible neighbor. The planes are loud. They're obnoxious. There's a Korea War era plane that I got a 110 decibel reading on at one point. This is somebody paying $600 an hour to rent a plane out for a joyride and disturbing 40,000 people at a time. I'd add there has been no outreach to the community of East Palo Alto about this expansion. They've intentionally kept their cards close to their chest and not talked to us about it. We're the ones most affected by it. We should be the first ones consulted about an expansion and not left without a seat at the table when the decision that will affect our lives and homes are being made. Planes have crashed regularly in East Palo Alto, including one in 2010 that was near my house. I remember the power lines going out, the loose dogs, the sirens. It was a horrible day, and nobody wants that. I'll end with, I'm very concerned about lengthening a runway to 3,500 feet that will allow small jets to use the airport. We do not want the added noise, pollution, and danger from jet aircraft, just so affluent travelers can have a little bit more convenient travel time. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Carol Mueller, followed by Albert H.
Thank you. I will be brief. I echo a lot of the comments made tonight, and so I won't try not to repeat them. I'm Carol Mueller. I've been in this area since 1979 when I first came to Stanford and started living in Palo Alto in 1982. And many have spoken and brought you important data and impressions, and I support a lot of what they said. The Baylands has evolved. It is a magnificent preserve. I think it's probably within walking and biking distance for a much larger percentage of people who live in our city than either of our other two nature preserves. And in these days, not everyone can afford a car. Many people don't want to drive because of the adverse impacts of driving. Many people don't feel safe driving. I think we need to make sure that we treasure and steward the Baylands. It's one of the few places left where you can actually see that Palo Alto is located on the bay with mountains circling it, with water next to it, with skies above, with stars, with the full moon rising, or a crescent moon, or no moon, as it might be. They're beautiful sunsets out there. My husband and I frequently go out there to take advantage of those, and I just want to evoke that for you if possible. At the same time, having lived right near Duveneck School.
Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Albert H., followed by Michael M.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for your efforts on this important issue. I live in the Duveneck area. Duveneck St. Francis, and Carol is my wife, so I'm the husband she referred to. Residents of Palo Alto and East Palo Alto need the following in order to be compatible with continued operation of Palo Alto Airport. Number one, reduction or elimination of exhaust emissions from fossil aviation fuel combustion. Two, complete elimination of lead emissions. Number three, reduction of noise associated with the totality of flight operations. The major impediment to achieving these, that is, airport yes, reduction in noise, reduction in lead, is the FAA rules, which we are compelled to follow because we take FAA money in order to do capital improvements on the airport, AIP and AIG programs from FAA. So I recommend to council that we stop taking FAA money and allow ourselves as a council and as a city to set our own rules regarding leaded fuels, regarding noise, regarding hours of operation, regarding operations during air quality events, and so forth. That's my recommendation to you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michael M., followed by Karen P.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, Council Member Koo, and all of you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And actually, I did have a speech that's about a minute and a half, but I've got to step back and set some things straight. First of all, Councilmember Tanaka, East Palo Alto was incorporated in 1983. It didn't just poof and become. And in fact, the airport and a lot of the golf course was a part of what was called Ravenswood until the Corps of Engineers redirected the creek. Point one. Point number two, there was talk about the cities of East Palo Alto and East Menlo Park, Belhaven, if you will, not being included in the study. They weren't invited to the table, I think was the word, but that's not quite true. As a matter of fact, it's not true at all. There were two in East Palo Alto, one in Menlo Park, and our residents have to do better. I'll just leave it at that. On top of that, if the one after the meeting at the golf course, several of the residents from Beach Street in East Palo Alto, which is where the only aircraft crash in East Palo Alto has happened, not the hyperbole you heard earlier. They asked for Michael Lugans and Andrew Swanson to meet with them, the residents of that street. They prepared, they came, they started to come. I've got a call and said,
your time is up.
We don't want to do it. Thank you. You guys will see me again.
Our next speaker is Karen P., followed by Mary Jo F.
I'd like to thank Council for some very pertinent questions. Okay, sorry. I'd like to extend my thanks to Council for some excellent questions. Consistent with the survey results and many of the comments tonight, I too believe that the only viable option is alternative one, because it would limit the expansion of PAO operations, which already produce unacceptable amounts of air and noise pollution. And by the way, nobody's proposing to discontinue angel flights or things like that. In May 2023, the staff report said PAO was the busiest general aviation airport in the Bay Area. So I, for that reason, don't think why we need to expand those operations. As many have said, many of the departures go northwest and turn directly over East Palo Alto neighborhoods at low altitudes, presenting environmental justice concerns. My main issue, as I've been talking about for years now, is specifically lead emissions. You may be familiar with the Environmental Protection Agency's finding issued last October called lead emissions from aircraft engines that operate on leaded fuel cause or contribute to air pollution that may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health and welfare. And that finding has many useful points in it, one of which is that the harmful effects
Your
of
time
lead
is up.
on human health are indisputable, and they primarily impact children. And it also
Your time is up.
the impact on the environment.
Our next speaker is Alice M., followed by Ruben A. Oh, Mary Jo F., followed by Alice M.
Oops, sorry, hold on. I just broke that. Okay, we can't hear the speakers if the microphone is wrong. Okay. Good evening, Mary Jo Fremont, Palo Alto. A solution in search of a problem. The airport is safe. There is no congestion. The airport functioned for decades at much higher levels of operations without a second taxiway. Angel flights, standard flights don't need a redesign to continue using the airport. Don't commit to a vertiport without knowing impacts. Ask staff for a study of eVTOL impacts.
so you can make an informed decision. The city has full control over the design of the airport. Bigger planes, more planes and eVTOLs at PAO, or protecting communities or the Baylands ecosystem. The choice is yours. By the way, Carol Ford, president of the California Pilots Association, advocated for growth in the Palo Alto Weekly. She doesn't have Palo Alto residents' best interest at heart. As a member of the San Francisco Roundtable, she voted against Palo Alto joining that roundtable. Finally, asked the airport for three things: more transparency, report usage and financial data, including the FAA grants, and review the grant applications before they're submitted. The 20-year assurances limit what you can do at the airport. 2, more effective noise abatement program. SFO gets about 135,000 PAO noise complaints per year. That's a lot. PAO needs a more stringent noise abatement program and should report violators. And 3, promote unleaded fuel, maybe with incentive, and report the sales of fuel, jet, unleaded, and leaded.
Our next speaker is Alice M., followed by Ruben A.
Good evening, Council. Back in the late 1980s, I was appointed for my first seat by the Palo Alto City Council to the Palo Alto Airport Joint Community Relations Committee. This was another era where we helped to make the Palo Alto Airport a great neighbor by doing face-to-face work with anybody who had a question about what we were doing. I was also one of the people to spearhead the involvement of the Palo Alto Bay Rangers at the Palo Alto Airport Day that the JCRC also started. Again, the whole point was to do face-to-face discussions between actual residents and neighbors to make the airport the best possible neighbor. Let's fast forward 40 years. We've had 40 years of the Chevron decision that the US Supreme Court passed in 1984, overturned in June by the Loper-Bright decision. The Chevron era created an edifice in the federal government of bureaucratic experts and bureaucratic paid consultants to do literal 2, 5, 6 foot paper piles to say, these are what your options are, decision makers. That's what happened here. Even, and I speak as a pilot now, even people at Palo Alto Airport didn't know about these 5 choices until they were rolled out at the golf course. Most pilots I know don't want an expansion into the Baylands, except maybe something that would be a restoration of some wetlands, like the old San Francisco Creek, which we call the Black Lagoon. Anyway, thank you.
Is up. Our next speaker is Ruben A., followed by Nina G.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Ruben Abrica. I'm a resident of 45-year resident of East Palo Alto, and I currently serve on the City Council, but I'm speaking as an individual. So I'm going to give my perspective from East Palo Alto as a East Palo Alto resident, although I think the dynamic that I see happening here, I think is starting to happen all over the world. For decades in East Palo Alto, I've heard 2 major concerns. One is the daily horrible noise pollution over several of our neighborhoods, every single day, year after year. The other one is plane crashes. Tragic. One on Beach Street killed all the passengers and barely missed homes, including one that housed a child care center. Tragedies are waiting to happen there still under the current situation, never mind all the alternatives. That's my perspective from East Palo Alto. And the March, other crashes have occurred there. I think that what I see happening all over the world, I've been studying a little more, I'm definitely not an expert, is that thousands and thousands and thousands of airports like this one here all over the world are really primarily, generally used. They're like luxury habits, bad habits for a few people at the expense of the many.
Your time is up.
If we keep doing that, we're going to burn up the planet. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Nina G., followed by David S.
Hi, 1 second.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm not a resident of Palo Alto, but I've spent a lot of time in the area and have lived in the Bay Area my entire life. The idea of destroying wetlands to basically infest the area with even bigger, louder aircraft over sensitive habitats and sensitive receptors, it just seems like a horrible idea. That kind of panders to elites and tramples and and paves over everything else. It just seems like a really bad idea. If you've ever been down to the bayfront, the airplanes are incredibly loud as they fly over. It's actually surprising that people don't like start or animals don't flee as they go over because they're just crazy loud. This seems like a bad idea, and you should listen to the populace and not necessarily to the pilots. Thank you.
Our next speaker is David S., followed by Mark S.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is David Stites, and I'm a pilot and aircraft owner. I own a Beechcraft Baron 55. I fly Angel Flight West missions and Pilots and Paws missions. I've actually flown the person that a previous pilot said they had flown, and I refuse to take my passengers to Palo Alto, even though that would be the best for them because of safety. So far, everybody's talked about safety, but I'm not the one that's going to put real numbers to it. My aircraft, when full of fuel, requires a total ground distance of 1,750 feet. There is a speed at which I can cut the throttle because I have a twin engine airplane, I can cut the throttle and safely set the airplane down, coming to a full braking stop without overrunning the air into the runway. That's 3,106 feet when I'm full of fuel. Based on Palo Alto's runway length, that would be me overrunning the end of the runway. So if you want to talk about safety, let's talk about expanding the length of the runway. That's the only way you're going to do that. Also, the unleaded fuel is already available. It's in VTOL, which is in Baton Rouge, has 1 million gallons of it. So it's there if you want it. You just have to get it. The PC-12s, they burn Jet A, not
Your
100
time
low
is
lead
up.
fuel.
Our next speaker is Mark S., followed by Valerie D.
Thank you. Do not upgrade this airport. PAO is a federally obligated airport, and you will have no control over what even minor changes like widening runways will bring. There are 5 9-passenger PC-12s at PAO, mostly operated by charter companies, even though the runway is short and the widths do not meet criteria. But if improvements bring PAO up to full FAA type compliance for these PC-12s, these companies can move from selling charters to selling regular scheduled flights by the seat, like Surf Air. And it opens the door to even bigger planes, and there'll be nothing the city could do about it. Also, we are under SFO and San Jose arrivals. There is no vertical airspace here. All noise is close to the ground, and it will be no better with electrics because the primary source of noise from small planes is the prop, not the engine. Think about it. SFO jet engines above us are at flight idle. Aircraft noise is not just the engine. As a federally obligated airport, the city will have zero control over future tenants, uses, or hours enabled by any upgrade to this airport. Federal aviation preemption is insidious. The only local control that has been left to you is to choose to change nothing. Please do that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Valerie D., followed by Toby G.
Thank you. Hi, I have the seated minutes of Marisa Churchill, a Palo Alto mother of 2, and Mark Beretti, a local teacher, father of 1 daughter. I think the airline owners in this room will probably see that the kids, elderly, and very high-profile business leaders, litigators, do not want this airport expansion. In fact, we now actually have banded together. We want to shrink the airport's impact on the community and stop the polluting. I'd also like to say that on an objective note, I've spoken with city employees who have knowledge of what the structural increase requires. And they told me the expansion will ruin what is an existing natural flood barrier, creating something that is very akin to Katrina. And it will require paying for artificial barriers that are not only hideous and not of any value to either the nature that lives there now, nor to our community. It will also cost billions of taxpayer dollars over a decade. So I hope the airline owners see this, they can go somewhere else, and they will not ruin our community or any other neighboring communities with unleaded fuel that gives kids cancer. And we all know, so many people have spoken about this. This is not necessary. On a personal note, I'd like to say this is a very important area for people with mobility issues. And there's so many elderly and kids there. There's a reason why people pay what they pay to live here, and this will destroy those property values. It will also increase insurance payments, which are already very high, because this will become a much more dangerous flood-prone area. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Toby G. Our next speaker is Deborah G, followed by Mila B.
I'm disappointed that from the get-go, the option of shutting the airport down completely was not on the table. Palo Alto wants another transmission line from PG&E because, oh, what if an airplane from the airport crashes into East Palo Alto again and takes out the 2 transmission lines? And my thinking is, how about we just get rid of the airplanes and maybe don't risk the lives of people in East Palo Alto and their health? That's my perspective, and I hope it's considered. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mila B, followed by Manny B.
Good evening, Mayor Stone and City Council. My name is Mila Bakala. I'm a university student and co-lead of the youth-led Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action Nature-Based Solutions team. I'm speaking today to urge the council not to approve any plan that would expand the Palo Alto Airport, increase air traffic, or move existing runways. Palo Alto is home to a rich wetlands habitat that supports integral species and also helps to mitigate climate change by drawing down carbon and building flood resilience. Expansion would necessarily disrupt these habitats, causing irreversible damage at a time when wildlife and cities are already contending with a shifting climate. Increased air traffic would also increase carbon dioxide pollution, accelerating the climate crisis, which has already made the future left to our generation incredibly uncertain. In deciding on its long-term airport plan, the city has a choice: to preserve biodiversity and the health of all community members, or to increase pollution and contribute to a warmer future. I strongly urge the council to choose the former and reject any plan to expand the airport or increase air traffic. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Manny B, followed by Alice S.
Good evening, Mayor Stone and City Council. My name is Mani, and I am a high school student and a co-lead of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action's Nature-Based Solutions team. I'm here to request that as you update the Palo Alto Airport's long-term plan, you do not expand its footprint and operations. Wetlands have an incredible ability to draw down carbon dioxide, to mitigate flooding, to increase water quality, and to support a great diversity of species, just as right here in the Bay Area. And we're already losing them around the world to development. Palo Alto cannot afford to continue this trajectory and instead must reverse it. And this airport expansion project does not meet this goal. I'm also deeply concerned by an increase in pollution from leaded fuel an expansion would bring. Residents of my city of San Jose have faced unjust health harms due to a small aircraft airport having used unleaded fuels. And I want to help ensure that Palo Alto and East Palo Alto residents are not exposed to heightened pollution loads due to an increase in air traffic. This is not to mention pollution of carbon dioxide from increased air traffic, as well as noise pollution that has been raised many times by residents and neighbors. I've seen Palo Alto and our region as a whole attempting to lead in protecting our climate and environment and advancing the rights of most burdened communities. And airport expansion would take us in exactly the wrong direction. The voice of constituents and neighbors throughout the South Bay is clear. The long-term plan for this airport should not include an expansion. Please listen to the sentiment. Thank you.
Your time is up. Our next speaker is Alice S.
Thank you. I'm Alice Schaefer Smith. I've written letters to the council and to the public. So I'm going to actually take up just one other issue, which I was shocked to hear tonight. We do not want to have a solar farm at the Baylands. Not only do we want to remove the airport, which would be the ideal solution, and return those lands to wetlands, but in the alternative, what we must not do is do anything that would impede the survival of the birds. If you've been at the Corozo Plains, you will see that solar farms can be disastrous. Thousands and thousands of birds have died at solar farms. So I would like to have the Silicon Valley, whatever the new name for the Audubon Society is, and to others to technically look at any design which anyone is proposing anywhere near the Baylands that relates to solar panels and solar farms, and ensure that they are safe in all regards for our precious birds. I'm a birder. That's more than bird watching. I want to preserve our birds. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Jenny B.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. My name is Jenny Varghese Bloom. I'm the Vice President of the Ravenswood City School District. I'm also a resident of East Palo Alto, and today I'm speaking on behalf of the residents of East Palo Alto, the residents where I serve of Bellhaven and East Menlo Park. Ravenswood School District was formed in 1892. Extending the runway is not a viable, sustainable option for our community. We are the ones who are directly affected daily by any of these options. Please do not question our intelligence. We know any expansion means bigger planes. So unless this council creates a law or city code that stops larger planes, we know that will happen. Larger planes will be flying over our neighborhood. We also know that you guys can't create that law or that code to prevent larger planes to fly over our neighborhood. And our community will once again bear the negative consequences of this action. If Palo Alto cares about the lungs and the quality of life of our children, the kids that our school district serves, the children on O'Connor Street, Beach Street, Larkspur, Daphne, Jasmine, Wisteria, Gyardia, Pulgus, Camellia, Abelia, Ivy, Newbridge, and many more, then what the plan should be is how to close this airport. So yes, I care about the Baylands very deeply. I care about the birds very deeply, but I care about my children and the children of my community even more deeply. And I really hope that you guys would be a good neighbor and love us just like you love yourself. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Obadiah B, followed by Grace P.
Obadiah Bloom.
Thank you.
Hi. I don't want the airport to get bigger, and I like going to the Baylands, and I like looking at all the birds I can see. And the noise of the planes will scare them all away. And when I watch TV, when the planes fly over my house, it glitches my TV. And they always fly by on the best part of whatever show I'm watching. My sister is scared if a plane falls on her head. My name is Obadiah Bloom, and I'm 7 years old. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Grace P, followed by Prince S.
Mayor, City Council members, my name is Grace and I live at Jasmine Way in East Palo Alto, just 722 yards from the Palo Alto Airport. I value the Palo Alto Airport's activities, but I strongly urge you not to extend or elevate the runway. Expanding the runway will allow larger planes, creating more noise and disruption for residents like myself and others in East Palo Alto, as well as harming the delicate ecosystem of the Baylands. Then we have the proposed 17-foot elevation increase of the runway. That's 3 of me stacked vertically. This change is unnecessary given current sea level rise predictions, which show such an increase wouldn't be needed for many decades. Raising the runway now would only exacerbate noise issues, with the sound of planes accelerating and decelerating carrying much further into residential areas and the wetlands, affecting both wildlife and people. It would also increase the visual prominence of the airport in the Baylands. I also urge you to prioritize East Palo Alto in these discussions. Our community is the most impacted by airport operations, but we're excluded from metrics and from the planning process. Noise mitigation boundaries need to begin where East Palo Alto's residential areas start, not just at Highway 101 as today. That's where the 1,500-foot elevation change is asked from the pilots today. But we live before the runway, before Highway 101. So thank you for paying attention to East Palo Alto.
Your time is up. Our next speaker is Prince S, followed by Barris K.
Thank you. This is Dr. Prince Shah. I live in the Duveneck St. Francis neighborhood. I've been a Palo Alto resident for the last 20 years. I heard a lot of good points today, and I agree with most of them. I think one point that has not been considered is that if we allow the wetlands to be compromised, we increase our risk for flooding. That increases the need for buying flood insurance. It also impacts property values, which is going to be very important for all of us. And I would like that to be factored in any future calculations on any expansion. The issue about unleaded fuel not being purchased, I imagine, is probably because it's more expensive. And I would like the city to ding the airport for not being able to subsidize this fuel at the same price, because after all, the airport is getting subsidized by the city, and the operations is affecting the health of our residents and neighbors. So it's important that we spend our dollars in the right directions. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Barris K, followed by Eileen M.
Hello. Yes, my name is Barış Karadogan. I'm a 25-year Menlo Park resident, Audubon board member, and an avid birder. 2 rare birds live in the Baylands. One is the Ridgway rail, and the other one, if you're very lucky to hear it, the black rail. These 2 birds are very much affected by the environment, especially tides. So when we think about losing 3.5 acres for birds, that may be a very big piece of what they need because the acreage changes. What I would like people to do is to make sure the real effect of the animals are studied. And I would very much like my children and my grandchildren to see the Ridgway rail and the black rail. So I wonder, why are we landing jets in an endangered species area? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Eileen M, followed by Stephen R.
Good evening, Mayor Stone and members of council. I'm Eileen McLaughlin, representing the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. I support so many of the comments that have come before me. We are a co-signer of that 13-group joint letter, and we also support letters and public comments by Emily Renzel. I was happy to hear multiple council members raise questions about sea level rise. Even without a levee plan, Palo Alto's wetlands provide an enormous expanse of protective natural infrastructure. Until you have a levee, the wetlands are all that you have and must be protected, particularly for the wastewater facility. Sea level rise also causes groundwater to rise. Already we know that groundwater is emergent, that is on the surface, at multiple places in the golf course. The same most certainly is true of the airport, edged by the bay and lower San Francisco Creek. Rising groundwater has a list of impacts. Higher action,
Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Stephen R.
Hi, my name's Steve Rosenblum. I'm a resident of Palo Alto. I've lived here for over 35 years, and I've never seen any direct benefit from the airport to me. I hear about angel flights. They can certainly occur at neighboring airports. All I see are noise and pollution. When I walk in my neighborhood or when I go to the Baylands, I'm constantly annoyed by touch and go landings there. I find it very inimical to the enjoyment of the environment. The question that was asked early in the discussion, which Mr. Shikata answered, is that the airport is essentially a money-losing proposition for the city, that it's subsidized by the city. And the question is, what does the city get for the money that it puts into the airport? And all I can see is we're paying to allow private pilots to use our airspace for their business and pleasure use. And I think we really need to rethink that. Just as the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors decided to close Reedy Hillview Airport because of the pollution of a local neighborhood, we should have the same courage to close the Palo Alto Airport. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cade C., followed by Julian.
Hello, my name is Cade Candy. I'm the Director of Programs at Climate Resilient Communities. We're an environmental justice group that works in East Palo Alto and the Bellhaven neighborhood of Menlo Park. I'd like to speak today in opposition to any proposed expansion or alterations of the Palo Alto Airport. First, as Pastor Burgess said, the community engagement on this effort has not been inclusive, despite running an organization dedicated to local climate justice work in EPA and Bellhaven, and 1.5 years of the project, we only found out about the very last meeting. Second, the Palo Alto Airport perpetuates environmental injustices. Moral consistency would require it be closed, and further expansion is incomprehensible. These communities have the highest rates of asthma in San Mateo County. A survey we conducted with Stanford of 320 Bellhaven families found asthma rates were twice as high as the rest of Menlo Park. The airport still uses lead fuels, something we know is toxic and contributes to asthma and neurological conditions. Seems like we're leaving that up to the free market to solve. As part of the soon-to-be-adopted Menlo Park environmental justice element, 1,800 Bellhaven residents identified pollution reduction as one of their top 3 priorities. Third, the Palo Alto Airport is located where it is because the wealthy and well-connected didn't want to bear its consequences, so it was shunted onto EPA and Bellhaven residents. The Palo Alto Airport is part and parcel of our region's racist history of redlining and racialized zoning. It is policy decisions like this proposed expansion that constitute the system in systemic racism. I know this council values racial justice, social and environmental justice, but it's easy to hold these views when they aren't under pressure. This is an opportunity to positively affirm your
Your time
values
is up.
and welcome new possibilities for a shared shoreline. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Julian, followed by Tatiana.
Hello. My name is Julian, and I'm a East Palo Alto resident, and I am calling today on in support, backing up everybody else. Good point from, Kate and everyone, I'm speaking in support for the shutdown of Palo Alto Airport, or number 1, which is not doing anything with it and literally just bringing the current buildings up to code. If that's the improvement that needs to happen, is literally just bringing the buildings up to code so that pilots can do whatever fancy thing they can do in there. But we're not gonna continue catering to the 1% that lands in Palo Alto with Mark Zuckerberg or whoever the hell else, who is flying a P whatever plane, which is not a lot of people and company. A lot of people said, don't this all at the stake of nature and animals, water, land, and people. Everybody's gonna bear the brunt of this, while the 1% that flies in here is not living in these communities, as well as the cancer and asthma that is put into generations of kids that are being born here in these communities. So I urge you guys to please throw this plan in the trash and not get in the pockets of the people that only see the color green, which is money and not people.
Your time is up. Our next speaker is Tatiana, followed by Susanna C.
Hi, my name is Uhila Makoni. I'm a resident of the city of East Palo Alto. I also serve on the Public Works and Transportation Commission for East Palo Alto. And I'm speaking as a resident that lives like previous residents of East Palo Alto live right next to the Baylands. I walk on the Baylands, and I just wanted to echo the feedback that previous speakers have already stated about the impacts to the people and the environment. So yeah, I'm putting in my vote, or I concur with alternative one of no expansion. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Susanna C, followed by Stephen P. Susanna C. Moving to our next speaker, Stephen P, followed by Antonio L.
Am I on it? Thank you. Many of the comments heard tonight view the airport as a nuisance or public hazard. It is neither. The Palo Alto Airport is not only a regional asset, but a national asset. Many of the speakers tonight see a dichotomy between the users of the airport and supporters of the Baylands. This is a false dichotomy. It is impossible to see the earth from above and not be an environmentalist. I am one. I walk the Baylands at least weekly, and I cherish them. Pilots hate it that we have to use leaded fuel. The unleaded fuel that is currently available is not usable for most of our airplanes. Unleaded fuel for these airplanes is now certified, but is not available yet. It should be available within 2 years. When it is, the leaded fuel issue will be put to rest. Safety has been raised as an issue. Accidents do occur, but it should be noted that in the history of the airport, no one on the ground has been injured or killed by an airplane in all of Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. Not one person ever. Several pedestrians are killed by cars in East Palo Alto every year, but there is no call to ban cars. Multiple people are killed by trains each year, and we don't call to ban trains. The issues here are complex. Many speakers have oversimplified them and view this as an either or choice. We can have an airport and take care of the environment. Please take time to study further these issues. I am ready and willing to assist you with your efforts.
Our next speaker is Antonio L, followed by Mark C.
Good evening, members of the City Council. My name is Antonio Lopez. I serve this year as mayor for East Palo Alto, but I'm speaking as a resident. It's good to see you guys, by the way. Now, I understand that this study session is largely perfunctory, that's part of your long-range plan. And I also want to give you guys kudos because there was public outreach, and I want to acknowledge that at Bloom House in August. But still, having sat here, having listened to the residents and comments, I'm wondering how are the concerns and priorities of East Palo Alto being addressed? When we're talking about the historic sites of pollution of leaded fuels, when we're talking about the joggers, the cyclists, the families in East Palo Alto whose health are such disparity, how are we going to jeopardize that with this expansion? And I also just want to take a moment to also add the noise. You know, individuals, I spent 4 years on this council, and the amount of people that tell me every single day when they're going to work, right, to go to your restaurants, your cafe shops. My father, who works at Sheraton Palo Alto for 40 years, the noise abatement and the toll that it takes on our workers coming to the city. Right. Think of the externality. So if the council will move forward with any of the proposed alternatives, I ask that you consider impact fees commensurate to the level of noise and air pollution that undoubtedly will exacerbate the quality of life of our residents. We mentioned asthma rates, we've mentioned health disparities. And I understand the wisdom of small airports like yours support SFO, Oakland, and San Jose, but I think you can all agree with me that the convenience of ease and air travel shouldn't be off the backs of our residents in East Palo Alto or Belhaven. Finally, we're not just a training ground for aviation enthusiasts. We're a community that deserves respect. And I'll just end by saying, we talk a lot about collaboration. It's something I hear a lot about this council. And I believe in it. That's why my government
Your
at this
time is
age.
up.
But this isn't it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mark C., followed by Martha B.
Hi, I'm requesting an extra minute of time, please, because I'm speaking on behalf of all the pilots. If not, can I please have my time reset? Thank you. Okay, hi, I'm Marko Zenkovic. I'm a software engineer at a local company. I'm also the board of a K through 12 institution, as well as alumni mentor of my alma mater. That means education is important to me. I also actually brought this tee over here from the Baylands golf course. I was playing 9 holes before I came here. And I want to say that I don't think the Baylands golf course will be too impacted by an expansion. But what I really want to talk about is the runway expansion and purporting to a crash that happened in 2011 with Tesla executives. If it could be argued that if there was a longer runway, they would have had, or if there was more facilities on the airport, there might have had a better chance at surviving that crash and mitigating the power loss to Palo Alto. I also want to say that the PC-12 or Type 2 Category 2 aircraft, and I'm a private pilot as well. That's not really the point here. I mean, it's one of the points, but the safety margins is a huge thing to airports, and it's a safety first education through airports or through private pilot programs is a major factor in the curriculum, and increasing safety margins is a huge motivation factor for these kinds of plans. I also want to mention that, why aren't we talking so much about noise pollution and safety and whatnot when there are people riding mopeds through the Baylands all the time, as well as cars that are designed with less visible blind spots than the M1 Abrams tank that was made in 1970. Why aren't we banning these kinds of cars? So yeah, please think of the impact as well as the education and scholarships that these airports provide. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Martha B., followed by Carol M.
Okay, hi. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, good evening, Mayor Stone and fellow council members of Palo Alto. I am sorry, I have 2 things going on. Sorry. I am the Vice Mayor of East Palo Alto, and tonight I'm speaking as a resident. And I just wanted to echo what some of the previous speakers have already mentioned. I believe that the expansion of the airport is not a good idea for our city, especially because of the safety concerns that we have already heard about. The increase of the air traffic would present a lot more chances for mechanical failures or accidents. Also, the noise pollution that has been mentioned, I hear it all the time. I actually live right next to the Baylands. And I also have to deal with the aircrafts that are flying in that are going to SFO. So imagine that, and that's a lot of noise already. Also, the health concerns go beyond the emissions, even though, you would use the green energy to address the air pollution. I'm just concerned about the increased traffic when you're doing this construction, the big trucks that will be going by the neighboring streets that are behind us on Embarcadero. Also, more people traveling to the area that would also create more exposure to the pollutants in our environment that would create more stress. Therefore,
your time is up.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carol M., followed by Joe K.
Good evening, City Council members. I'm a 45-year resident of Palo Alto. I'm also a private pilot. I also began the DART program, the Disaster Airlift Response Team at Palo Alto Airport. I don't think that any of the pilots at Palo Alto Airport are really looking for expansion of the airport. They're mainly looking at a land use plan that will allow for modernization of the airport so that the current planes can perform safely, so that we can have education for the pilots of the future with safety, and we don't need to accept any of these plans that have been put forth for consideration. We can either do something entirely different or accept parts of these plans. And I think we can work with the surrounding communities to make something happen that will be satisfactory to all. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joe K, followed by Maria R.
All right, thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Joe Kraus. I live in Palo Alto for the last 30 years. If you've wandered by the Scooby-Doo Mystery Machine, that is mine. And it's a great process. I've never spoken or even been to a city council meeting, and I have loved it. I love the process that's going on here. I mean, so many issues are battles or contests of competing goods, and you see it here tonight. Competing goods of environmentalism, competing goods of public use, competing goods of pollution, and competing goods of public safety and fire use of the airport, et cetera. So I'm here, I'm a passionate 30-year aviator. I trained at Palo Alto Airport, but I'm actually here as a father of 2 teenage pilots that I trained. I became a flight instructor to have that experience of training them in the passion of aviation because they have an interest potentially in a career. My interest for them is safety. And yes, there have not been a significant number of incidents, but I will tell you as a flight instructor and certainly as a father that I worry every time that they come into Palo Alto, especially at night with the poor lighting system, in rainy conditions with a runway that's quite short. And so I don't know how to balance the competing goods of extending the runway for safety, which inevitably can bring some larger aircraft in. I think that kind of comes along for the ride. So I appreciate the effort you're taking tonight in balancing these competing goods. It's been a great opportunity to listen to multiple sides of the debate.
Our next speaker is Maria R, followed by Filiberto Z. Maria R, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, hello. My name is Maria Rocha, and I've been a proud resident of East Palo Alto for 46 years. I live on Wisteria Drive. I want to thank everyone who has acknowledged the impact this issue has on my community. While protecting acres of baylands is important and environmental preservation should be a priority, we must not forget the human impact. Expanding the runway increases the risk of another tragedy. Our community has already faced an aircraft accident February 17, 2010. It took Lisa Jones 4 years to rebuild her home. Living under the threat of potential aircraft accidents creates lasting psychological harm, especially for our children and elders. We're not just talking about nature, we're talking about people's lives, homes, and well-beings. I want to remind everyone that environmental justice isn't just about preserving land, it's about protecting people too. Our community deserves the same level of care and consideration given to nature. Let's not neglect the human factor here. We cannot trade the safety and health of East Palo Alto residents for development. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Filiberto Z. Filiberto Z.
Hi there, Council. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Good evening. I am also here to give my input and opinion on the airport expansion. I am a lifelong resident of East Palo Alto, and I'm the environmental justice campaign organizer at Youth United for Community Action. And I am completely against any type of expansion due to the constant pollution that will come from it into our community. We have had so many battles of dealing with pollution and environmental racism over the years. This is just another example of it. And I refuse to have something like this implemented so nearby my community. Along the lines with that, I also believe that it will be hazardous on the habitat of the marshlands and just an overall inexcusable attempt to attain more money for the people that are on that site. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Moana, followed by Amy A.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Moana. I am the senior youth organizer at Yuka. I am also here to support my voice in not expanding the airport at all. I do not support this. And I would like to say that it is increasing the pollution of our community in East Palo Alto, and it's affecting us most and first of all. And we're affected by it because it's in our backyard, not in Palo Alto. We're the closest one. And yeah, thank you.
Our next speaker is Amy A, followed by Alexander M. Amy A, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. Moving to our next speaker, Alexander M.
Good evening. My name is Alexander, a local resident and environmentalist. I enjoy walking in the Baylands, and I'm a pragmatist. One of the few things that everyone actually did agree on today was that increasing the runway length would improve safety at Palo Alto Airport. Although the airport is within EPA lead limits, no pilots like lead. Palo Alto now does offer lead-free fuel for some aircraft, and most pilots, like you heard earlier, are excited for the recently approved lead-free fuel to expand to commercial production in the next 2 years. Electrification will be next after that. On the economic side, we already know that the airport has positive impact to the local economy, contributes to the city budget, et cetera, but it goes deeper than that. With Reed Hillview slated to close, San Jose State University will lose their aviation program, like the maintenance program that I went through, as well as their pilot training. So now our airport will be one of the few in the area that provides an avenue for people to train for well-paying jobs that is not in software engineering. I'm now on the board of a local nonprofit that has already mentored a group of high school students to build an airplane from scratch. Several of them have now learned to fly in that plane, and we're with the second group of students building the next aircraft. This is providing a valuable alternative path to six-figure careers that is outside of software. Please adopt any of the options which increase runway length to increase safety, reduce noise while still respecting the environment, and preserve a vital path to economic success and equality outside of
Your
high
time
tech.
is up.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is Elliot W.
Thank you, Mayor Stone and council members. Thank you, City Manager Shikata. I just wanted to say thank you for putting forward this effort, because we've now got a whole community rising up with new levels of awareness. I don't know, I had the chance to speak with a variety of people. The pilots are really against any of the alternatives other than one, it seems. And I'm not sure who brought forward the context of 1987 and the incorporation of East Palo Alto, but it was misguided, because the fact is Ravenswood City School District has been there for a lot longer. The lead issue is not insignificant. I'm on the board of Climate Resilient Communities, Environmental Volunteers, and serving as the executive director of Hiddenville, and I can say that this is going to become an increasing issue. And so increased aviation flights going from 180,000 to 360,000 is not the right path. The folks that bought homes in 1930 didn't have 180,000 flights coming. So strongly standing on to no expansion, but safety. We need safety. So it's possible to do that. And I think Council Member Burt has brought forward the fact that this needs a vote if it's going to expand into parkland. So I'm swooping my arms around the context of everything that's been said tonight and heartily recommending no action. Thank you so much for your time.
And that concludes public comment on study session item 3.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll come back and continue the discussion. All right, coming back from our break, we're going to continue on with this item. So Bring it back to the dais for discussion, but City Manager real quick for an update.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. For one thing, I thought it might be helpful just to speak to the agenda for the evening and perhaps get some clarity on that. We have had some sidebar discussions sufficient to recommend that we defer item number 4 on your agenda. That would allow the council to finish your discussion of the item that we're currently on. Quite frankly, I'd suggest the same with city manager comments. Those actually are a bit up in the air in terms of future agendas, depending on where you end up with this item. So wanted to provide that time for the council to continue the discussion. Then if we could, I don't know if we need action on that. I guess we do on continuance of item number 4. To date uncertain? No. Okay. City attorney feels we're good to go. Then back on the item before you, the airport long range plan. Really, perhaps seek your guidance as to how you'd like to proceed with this evening. We have staff has structured the presentation to get feedback on the elements of what you'd like to see in a preferred alternative, so we can continue down that path. There was some earlier questions raised that we do not have answers for this evening. So an alternative would be for us to identify some of those questions and have staff come back to the extent that that is helpful in order to get that feedback. So it's a bit of a choice on how you'd like to proceed this evening.
All right. Thank you for that update. Okay. And we'll bring it back to the dais. Councilman Ku, your light is on. Is that intentional? Was that from earlier, maybe?
No, I think my knee keeps on hitting it.
We can come back to you, or if you're ready, you can go now.
I'm ready,
Okay,
actually.
go ahead.
So firstly, I want to say thank you to everybody who came out here tonight and provided public comments, including cities of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. It's very valuable to hear from you, the effects, and obviously there's a lot that we need to do. This current agenda and this report did not provide sufficient information, and there might not have been enough outreach to the different communities. So I think that we need to continue working on that. But I do want to say that I have interacted, Mr. Swanson had welcomed me at the airport, as well as many of the other presidents and members in the airport community have welcomed me there. I've actually joined and participated in CalDART's exercises, in order to know what they're doing and so forth. There's the Civil Air Patrol, the association, CalDART, there's the Angel Flights. There is also, the organ donations that come into the airport and goes to Stanford Hospital. So yes, there's a lot of things at the airport. I've also been very supportive of the Bay Area Urban Eagles, where they teach underprivileged students to fly airplanes. There's also the outfit that does bring in kids to tear apart an airplane in order to put it back together. This is another form of helping them learn a profession, and it's all really great and good. At the same time, I do have to say that I have been I have served on the Santa Clara County, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz Roundtable, as well as a liaison to the San Francisco Roundtable for many years. And I will say, dealing with the FAA, you have no control over the airport. We have no control over the airport, and that is a huge concern for me. So, as anything we do there, why would we expand or do anything that would increase its capacity or operations and give away the leverage that we have over the airport? So I just want to quickly mention some of my key points. There are people suffering, and that's enough. Noise from 6 airports: Palo Alto, San Francisco, San Jose, San Carlos, Moffett Field, and Oakland. The speakers showed 328 events per day and 66 from Palo Alto. I think Ms. Yappi showed that. And we shouldn't make people's lives worse with our actions there. We cannot control San Francisco or San Jose expansion. However, we do have full control over Palo Alto. Climate change, right? The city has a goal to reduce carbon emissions by 80%. Planes are one of the worst offenders. It's not just about fuel. It's also about noise. And I want to bring that back to that. Lengthening the runway, building an additional taxiway, and building more hangars will increase capacity and therefore the number of operations. It doesn't help our goals. So we have the Baylands, very, very treasured by our community and by neighbors and all around. As a matter of fact, when I was mayor, President Biden came and visited the Baylands. So, that's obviously something that the nation knows about. So I support the points from the letter signed by the 17 organizations to council asserting the need to protect the Palo Alto Baylands. And we must protect its health and the quality of life, also for the residents in Palo Alto and neighboring communities like East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And let's not aggravate impacts on native plants and wildlife. To put a EV toll now and to build it without understanding its potential impacts, that's not wise at all. So I just want to say advanced air mobility will bring hundreds to thousands of more aircrafts. I'm going to finish up. We cannot impose, having served on San Francisco Roundtable as a liaison and the SCSC Roundtable, one of the most important things I've learned is that the airport has no ability to limit the number of operations or impose curfews. Once we build more capacity, we have no ability to dial things down or return to pre-EV toll. And we cannot pass any noise ordinance on aircrafts or curfews. The FAA won't allow that. Also, we have responsibility to our residents and the neighboring jurisdictions. So in terms of health, in terms of noise. So I want to say that my position is do not lengthen, shift, or raise the runway. Do not build another taxiway. We should select alternative one, no action. In addition, we should study the EV tolls impacts before committing to a new vertiport. And if we're going to install solar panels and maintain infrastructure, that it does not change the airport footprint or increase operations. I'd like to also see more transparency from the airport on types of users and operations, more effective noise abatement procedures, and some actions to reduce the use of leaded fuel. First priority is, I want to repeat, no action, keep it with alternative one, and to study the EV tolls. In addition, I would like to ask to see that we bring more information and data about the numbers above, the N above, and CNL for noise for in at least 3 locations, and to do a sensitivity analysis on the volumes and mix of aircrafts. Thank you for allowing me to go a little bit over.
Councilmember Vinker.
Thank you. First, I'd like to echo Councilmember Koo's thank you to all of the public commenters. It's really valuable to us on issues like this, and I know it takes courage, especially when there is some disagreement in the room. I also want to thank staff. I know a lot of work went into not just the options, but also the ancillary issues of addressing sustainability, a leaded fuel transition plan, and more. So appreciate all of that. Regarding the main issue, let's be clear. There was no call for airport expansion from council, from staff, from residents, or even from the aviation community that triggered this analysis and the proposals. Instead, as was mentioned, the FAA requires that we perform the current analysis. And in the course of that analysis, it could have been the case that people said, oh, what a great idea, or expansion would serve a real need, or even that would be nice. But with some very limited expansions, exceptions, that did not happen. In fact, the opposite happened. as the community has largely rallied around our beloved Baylands. And I too care deeply about the natural environment, environmental justice, the climate impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, the health impacts of lead emissions. And Councilmember Burt has raised the issue that we would likely need to undedicate parkland to do the expansion. So thus, option one is my preferred alternative. But based on tonight's discussion, there are two things I would like to know more about. And the first is safety issues. Most of the pilots who've spoken tell us that even 100 more feet would help. Most are not asking for more. Yet all four of our alternatives increase the runway by more than 100 feet. So I'd like to know more about that. The second issue I'd like to know more about is the issue of go-arounds that Public Speaker Thomas M. raised. Thomas asserted that the short runway results in more go-arounds, which increases greenhouse gas emissions, lead emissions, and noise. So I wonder whether we could designate option one as our preferred alternative. And since we don't need to do any engineering analysis if we do nothing, could we analyze an option which would add 100 feet of length, which is 57 feet less than option two, the smallest one, so long as we also analyze whether we could add 100 feet without undedicating any parkland, whether it would in fact decrease the number of approaches to the airport and thus decrease noise, greenhouse gas emissions, and lead emissions. Because ironically, if it does, then this modest increase in runway length could actually increase environmental justice by reducing those forms of pollution until we can get the aircraft transferred to unleaded fuel or alternative fuels, EVs or hydrogen or whatever may be coming. And also analyze whether it would in fact increase safety, just whether a shorter 100-foot ad. I would also, you're asking city manager about other things we were curious about. I'm also curious how both option one and if we added this modest 100 feet would interface with sea level rise mitigation in the absence of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers interaction. A little more analysis on how we discontinue the use of leaded fuel. We heard a lot of public comment tonight that, I know you've done a lot of work, but I like your plan, just like a little more thinking on that. How we might modernize the airport without extending the runway. So in other words, not do nothing, but maybe the terminal building or other things that don't increase the footprint. And finally, how we can work with our neighbors in Menlo Park and East Palo Alto as we move forward. So like many of the speakers tonight, I spend a lot of time in the Baylands. Every time a plane flies overhead, the noise does break into the experience. I appreciate the services that the airport provides, but I do feel that breaking into the experience. I do worry about the lead until we get transitioned. So I don't want to see either of those increased, and that's why I prefer the first option. But thank you.
Councilmember.
Thank you. So before going into my comments, can I get a quick answer to a question? We have gas tax on the sale of gas at the airport. Do we set that tax? Do we have latitude in how to set it?
The fuel sales tax is set by the state. So
okay, so we don't have latitude on.
Oh, we have a fuel flowage fee also.
Okay,
yeah, sorry.
All right, that's the one that I'm referring to.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll share in a moment how that ties in with transitioning to unleaded fuel. So in 2006, I think it was 2006, we actually had a strategic plan developed on the future of the airport. And a guiding principle was to move it to a more sustainable airport. And we actually have done one of the major steps when the tarmac was repaved. We became, I don't know, one of the only GAAs in the country, maybe the only, that is fully wired underneath, basically, for to be able to tap into solar generation and to provide electricity for charging throughout that area to a great degree. Is that correct, Andy?
Yes, that is correct.
So that really makes us potentially a leader in transitioning away from not just leaded gas, but from polluting internal combustion engines on planes. That'll happen over an extended period of time. That transition in aviation is probably a decade behind what's happening in automobiles, but it's ramping up. So my guiding principles are similar to, I think, Council Member Vinkers. I want to see us transitioning into a more sustainable airport that is healthier and safer for particularly adjacent communities. That means removing the lead. It means working toward less noise over time and reducing the risk of crashes from the airport in any way we can. So those would be principles that I'd like to see incorporated more strongly in whatever we come up with. It was alluded to in the staff report, but it's almost like it was a footnote. It, in my mind, should be very central. It also, with solar generation at the airport, it provides two revenue streams, which is essentially the ground lease for the solar panels and perhaps a higher revenue stream from the revenue from having planes be under awnings that are today very expensive planes in the sun, in the rain and storms. And so we've talked about that, where I think we're on the cusp of being able to do that. I'd very much like to see that accelerated. I think whatever what we're talking about is either option one or some variation of that. And that variation would be if there are some very modest ways in which safety could be improved as a result of a nominal extension of the runway within the current airport footprint, that might be something that the council would be open to. We'd have to see specifics of that. I wouldn't attempt to decide that's 100 feet or what it is at this point in time, but return to us with how much change there could be in that and what would be the pros and cons of doing that. And so on the leaded fuel, which I want us to be leaders and do everything we can to accelerate adoption of unleaded fuel. And great news is that it appears that the 100 octane is on the horizon, but we still have some financial barriers to adoption. And that's where I'd be very interested in changing our fueling charge structure so that we increase it modestly on the unleaded and use that to subsidize or have a lesser fee, basically, for pumping. Did I say that right? Increase it on the leaded and decrease it on the unleaded. And so that we try to incentivize adoption of the unleaded. And so I think that's the framework that I would want to see as a return. And I hope that this process has been a lesson that we really need to be taking steps back on such major issues before this gets launched into the community, to frame really more carefully what it is that we're trying to do, and to allow the council and the public to wade in at an earlier stage in a substantive way so that we don't get this kind of concern on things that were pretty much non-starters, and yet we in essence create a backlash to some of the things that the airport users would actually support. And I'm glad to hear tonight that from the airport users, very few of them are asking for an increase in the airport size. We're looking at how do we make it cleaner, safer, and more efficient. So thanks.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I substantially agree with the comments that Councilmember Burt and Councilmember Vinker mentioned. So I'm going to just make a few adds here and go back to one edit on what Councilmember Vinker said. But of course, safety issues is what should drive this. But we all have to remember up here that safety issues, candidly, can be used to sort of manipulate some decisions. And that's where that problem comes into effect on the extra 50 or 100 feet of runway, because the mayor said it before, if we build it, they will come. We will get bigger aircraft there, which is more traffic. So that's on a fine edge there where we're looking at the safety factors of that particular type of thing. I think we should be fully supportive of repairs that include safety. Someone said there's a bump in the runway. Well, we don't need a major federal grant to do that. We need to fix the bump in the runway. So those kinds of repair issues. Then when you get into additions, tonight, I don't think we have enough knowledge to make a judgment about if it's a good way to, reduce the go-arounds. But then, so I think another pilot said, with another taxiway, there's some other advantages there in terms of, less takeoff. So things like that, I think are okay for us to look at. But I think they're going to be a hard sell because that's going to run into the area of we're adding more aircraft. You confirmed the research that I had done, and that is that sea rise is a little bit in the distant future. Plus, we can also always build it underneath there. So that is something I don't think you would have to consider. Certainly, I think we want to look at the vertical rising aircrafts, but that could be a start in year 10 to look at this more specifically. And we need to know what's going on there environmentally, as well as the noise part of it, but both need to be looked at. You mentioned that, we really need a new terminal. That I'd like to hear eventually some justification of that. I mean, it's not an architectural marvel, but it's supposed to be a small airport. So why would we spend money putting up, the Taj Mahal? And there's some things on here, I won't reference them all, but on your, what I think of as a wish list, staff report, page 6, one of them, for example, says integrate the facilities adjacent to the adjacent Baylands golf links and nature preserve. Well, you heard public comment tonight say they're already too integrated. So I don't really know what that means, but there's some outliers here that just seem a little bit strange and not sort of the meat of what I think we're hearing from the public and what our comments are. So I think the environmental issue that I raised initially here of the get over to unleaded fuel ASAP, we have to work within the law, but let's get there. And if we can take action on our own, we should do that literally ASAP, as Councilmember Brinker also noted. So I think I'll hold there. Thank you.
Councilman Lithcott-Ames.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to begin by thanking staff and also the incredible number of members of the public who came out tonight to help us think all of this through. We had elected officials from East Palo Alto, Mayor Cecilia Taylor, Menlo Park, Mayor Antonio Lopez of EPA, and others. And it's just, this is how the sausage gets made. And it's a long evening, but it's so important that we have every opportunity for folks to be heard. I think what I want to say is everything we do has got to be consistent with our climate goals, or there's got to be a really good reason why those goals don't pertain. And so when I think about the airport, I'm concerned by something someone in the public said about the critical aircraft that we're sort of designing this because of the Pilatus PC-12s. Don't use unleaded fuel. And I just wanted to push on that. Is that true that the PC-12s only use leaded fuel? They do use.
No
lead, the other way around.
So they use Jet A. They use Jet A, like kerosene, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is where Pat's gonna tell me that E in front of that thing stands for electric eVTOL. All right. I have not been persuaded that the safety issues raised warrant some degree of expansion, but I do appreciate Councilmember Vinker's notion of a modest 100-foot extension to the runway in the hope that, yes, it's safer, but it also, in being extended, would reduce the number of those circle back around flights that we heard about, which means noise and lead could be reduced by a very small extension. So I support the idea of that option being looked at. I also appreciate Councilmember Burt's concern about this whole thing being predicated on the notion of parkland being undedicated. And I think that issue was not framed as well as frankly, it was not framed at all, I think, in the materials we were given. And so it's going to be super important to get a clear understanding of that really, really soon. I think what I want to close with is I was deeply concerned by what felt like an assertion by a colleague that the airport was here before East Palo Alto. My colleague didn't say why he had posed that point. It left me wondering why the question was asked. I can't presume to know. But what I do want to say in response to that topic is that while East Palo Alto may have been incorporated in 1983, decades after the airport was established, unincorporated or incorporated, the land we now call East Palo Alto has historically been land on which Native and Japanese and Black and Latinx and Pacific Islander people have lived. In an era of redlining and blockbusting, prevalent from the late 40s through the 70s, this was in fact the only place in the local area where members of such racial and ethnic groups could live. And that was no accident. Redlining put those perceived as less worthy of opportunity and protection on the margins and in the most undesirable real estate places, locations. So as a matter of environmental justice, I believe we have an obligation today not to dump our noise and lead pollution on neighbors, particularly when those neighbors are members of populations systemically underrepresented in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties and overrepresented in the vicinity of the airport where the pollution is created. As a member of the public, Ms. Yapley pointed out in her presentation on behalf of a group, Black folk are less than 3% of Santa Clara County, but over 17% of residents within a kilometer of our airport. Latinos make up 18% of our county, but are over 40% of the residents who live within 1 kilometer of the airport. And of course, Black and Latino folks are a very small percentage of the Palo Alto city population. These numbers don't feel very good. The picture painted by these numbers don't feel good to many of us. And my feeling is we ought to be addressing the disparate environmental impact on our neighbors as it is now, and not have a conversation about expanding or increasing the number and size of planes without facing who would be impacted by those changes. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any further lights. I got a question. Just kind of follow up on the discussion we're having right now. If we were to expand the airport by 100 feet, I mean the runway by 100 feet, would that address safety concerns while still not placing the Palo Alto Airport into Group 2 categorization? And second part, is there room to be able to do that within the existing footprint and not expand into dedicated parkland?
So the group, changing the group and the category, it goes back to the aircraft that's using it. So it's a design standard. So that's what's being looked at for safety for the design aircraft. So
by doing that, it would allow for
either way.
Group 2?
Either way, it would be the group that is, through the study looking at it, it came up and said the PC-12, and that's the group and category that is using the aircraft today. Whether the shift to make the improvements, it would still be the Group 2 category because that's the aircraft. That's the identified aircraft of over 500 operations.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
I think from a lot of comments I'm hearing, there seems to be an interest in making safety improvements that don't increase the capacity.
Yep.
And I think that's the source, Mayor, of your question about what the 100 feet could do. I don't think we're prepared to answer that tonight, but as part of our follow-up work, we can go back and look at which of these types of improvements that we've called out are safety improvements for what types of aircraft and which ones are likely to increase capacity.
Great, thank you. That's exactly what I was interested in. And then just some thoughts. I mean, I've been working on airplane noise impacts, I think most of my first term, if not the entire first term. I was on the now defunct Santa Clara Santa Cruz Roundtable, the liaison to the SFO Roundtable. I lament frequently the fact that Palo Alto does not have an official seat at the SFO table. I find it unconscionable that despite significant impacts and constant noise events caused by flights going into SFO, that Palo Alto has no seat at that table. And despite this, I've worked closely with staff, thank you, community advocates, SFO executives to work on solutions to be able to mitigate those impacts. And while we don't have control over SFO or San Jose, we do have control over the Palo Alto Airport. But once we expand, it seems like we're going to lose most of that control over to the FAA. And I can tell everybody from experience, they don't play well with others. We already have too many aviation impacts. We don't need more. And the Palo Alto Airport impacts us all. I mean, we want to talk about safety issues. It's important, but we need to talk about the public health safety issues. Because when I did ask staff earlier to be able to point to evidence of safety concerns of incidents on the runway, we didn't hear any, but we heard a litany of public health safety impacts from the public that are real and measurable. Noise monitors, and thanks to some of the public who brought this up, show that Palo Alto Airport's decibel levels are as loud as some other SFO and San Jose bound flights. And in addition to noise impacts, which is of course not just an annoyance, it's a health risk. We also have a serious health impacts from leaded fuel emissions from the airport, and thought it was really compelling. Of the top 100 lead polluting airports in the United States, Palo Alto is ranked 19. And they're flying over our homes, our schools, our parks, and of course, our beloved and sensitive Baylands. And in 2021, Santa Clara County conducted a study on blood lead levels of children living near Reed-Hillview Airport. And as a speaker tonight mentioned earlier this evening, Hillview ranked 34, Palo Alto ranked 19. The findings were clear. Read, the closer a child lived to the airport, the higher their lead levels, even when other factors were considered. On average, children residing within half a mile of the airport saw their blood levels increase by 0.2 micrograms per deciliter, which is comparable to half the spike observed during the Flint, Michigan water crisis that exposed up to 12,000 children to lead-contaminated water. Children living downwind of Reed-Hillview within this range had lead levels approaching those recorded in Flint. This impacts not only Palo Altans, but also our neighbors who we heard from tonight in Menlo Park and East Palo Alto. I just can't support a plan that will only worsen those impacts on health, safety, and quality of life in Palo Alto and our neighboring communities. And even if we have hopes of converting to electric or other unleaded fuels, we know this is going to take a very long time to be able to do. The life of airplanes are incredibly long. And then on the parkland issue, I think undedication of parkland is going to be a non-starter for Palo Altans. It is for me, and I'm almost certain it will be for Palo Alto voters. And once we undedicate that land and expand the airport, we lose that space for the next several generations, if not forever. And the public speaker mentioned earlier tonight the importance of our open spaces on our mental health, and the benefit we all get from simply being able to escape this urban reality by going to the Baylands for a short reprieve. I think access to nature is an absolute right. We should all protect it. And of course, this just reminds me of one of my favorite songs from the Counting Crows, Big Yellow Taxi. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. You don't have to cover your ears. But don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone, They paved Paradise, put up a parking lot. I just think today the proposal is not a parking lot, but an expanded airport runway, and I can't support paving over Paradise. So those are my thoughts. Councilmember Tanaka?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to thank all the members of the public and staff. It's crazy late. A lot of people came out. Definitely agree that this could have been handled probably a bit better, more communication, but I know it's not so easy. Anyways, I thought that Councilmember Vinker had a very well-reasoned thought in terms of it could, I always love solutions that are kind of win-win for everyone, where everyone kind of wins somehow. And if her, proposal makes sense, maybe that's something we should consider, right? So if it's just a little bit longer, to make it a little bit safer. We did hear the pilot says that they have to circle more. And so if we could reduce the amount of noise, the amount of pollution, the amount of, safety issues, it seems like, why not? Why not do that? So I don't know if staff can explore that, but that if it is true, that sounds like, the kind of thing we want, something that's a kind of win for everyone. And then, I've been following the eVTOL stuff, and my dad actually used to work on helicopters, and so I've been around a lot of helicopters as a kid, and they are crazy loud. And so I for one would much rather see eVTOLs than helicopters, for instance. And so I think that's actually something worth to explore, because that's also kind of potentially a win-win situation where less pollution, less noise. Some of these eVTOLs, they advertise themselves as being I forgot like Joby and a few other ones, they advertise themselves as being like super quiet, and that's one of the benefits in an urban environment. And so whenever we can look at solutions, whether it's like just a slightly longer runway or eVTOL where, we could do more but have less impact, I'm also a big fan of that. So wanted to thank staff for you guys to kind of work on that, and Councilmember Finker for your idea, because I think it makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Staff get what they needed? All right.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to staff. Thank you for the public, to council. All right. With that, city manager, we're moving. We're not going to do your city manager comments tonight.
I'd recommend we proceed with adjournment.
Okay. Well, I like that. Let's do that. All right. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.